A calm, quiet, starry night, three large figures rose behind people's houses. They moved towards the houses, bending over, looking at them. The large figures turned out to be red creatures, huge. They were cleaning up. People were running out of their houses, screaming. They were scared and confused. In all this devastation, the man held the girl on his lap and called her, urging her to wake up. A young man with red hair screamed loudly, his eyes full of fear and pain. The same red-haired little girl lay on his lap with her eyes closed and tears gathering in the corner of her eyes. They noticed that the creatures that attacked their town were approaching them. They were frightened and did not know what to do. In the alley between the houses, a red figure with horns loomed. She saw people sitting on the road. Destroying everything in its path, the red giant was approaching. A ray poured out of its eyes. With this ray, it cut through all the earthen houses. A column of light rose behind the buildings. Fragments flew in all directions. It was cold, dark, and scary. A wave of stones and smoke fell over Aiden. He tried to hold on and not fall, holding onto the stones with his hand. The young man was crawling. He was missing an arm and a leg, but he was crawling forward. He had his own goal, and he stubbornly walked towards it. Raising his face up, he screamed very loudly in pain and grief. What he saw made him freeze in horror. His Alice was broken into two halves. One half had already dissipated. Aiden looked at it all. Clutching what was left of the girl, the young man screamed and screamed. He wondered why this happened to them. He cried and cried, asked a question, but never received an answer to it. The pain took over him completely. Having clasped his hand with her palm, the little girl, who gradually fell apart, asked for forgiveness. The girl's blue eyes were clouded with tears. She was falling apart into many pieces and had already resigned herself to her fate. Finally, Alice disappeared. Aiden watched and did not believe what was happening. He must survive no matter what. Stretching out his hand, the girl's bracelet remained on it. The last thing from her. The young man looked at it for a long time. He was surrounded on all sides. Shadows were moving closer. In the darkness, they seemed black, with horns, and Aiden sat and grieved. Along with the red creatures in the middle, a man in black appeared. They approached the young man, considering him a mistake that could lead to a virus. The man in black was wearing a strange white mask. Half of his mask had a glowing eye, the other half had nothing. He called the young man by name. Aiden should be removed forever. The man directed his beam towards the young man, and he began to crumble. His gaze slowly subsided. He fell apart, asking the question to himself. There would be no answer to it. He knew it. A variety of monsters, winged, horned, toothy, magical creatures that terrorized the world. Humans were chosen by the game system to hunt monsters. The common people were glad that the chosen ones appeared who could protect them. 3 young men with a gift. As if this was in the order of things, the players began to treat ordinary people terribly. They beat them and mocked them. People endured. They could not do anything. Gritting their teeth, they saw the disgrace that the chosen ones were doing. That man in black, with a mask on his face, with one glowing eye, was the moderator of the system. If someone went against the rules, they were checked by a moderator, labeled as a bug, and something terrible happened during the check. Aiden exhaled. He didn't care about the moderator or the players. He sat with his head bowed. He sat covered with a blanket in the snow, barefoot, holding a bundle with a small child in his hands, hugging him as tightly as possible. Lost in the crowd with a baby in his arms, Aiden benefited from regular checks. When the check was carried out, everyone froze. But he and Alice were able to move. They took advantage of this moment and helped themselves to food in the store. Gathering everything he needed, he stealthily walked to where they were waiting for him. Survival was a special task, so he was not interested in why they could move. Here he is sharpening a sword with a large sledgehammer, but breaks it off. He didn't expect it, so he was at a loss. His eyes widen in fear. A drop of sweat runs down his temple. He will be punished! He will be scolded! Suddenly, a fist flies into the cheek, a shadow fist. A strong blow, lips curled. 2 people, one of them is very angry and hits Aiden so that he flies away and hits his back on the floor. His sledgehammer bounces off. The nodules were set. The teeth were clenched. The hand was gathered into a fist. This is a player, and he was angry. He managed to fail. He was angry because of the loss of valuable resources. Thanks to Aiden, this young man was to blame. A shoe was thrown at the young man, who cowered in fear. Swearing was heard from above, and the owner of the shoe began to boil with anger. The young man slowly got up. The 2 guys went to another place. They treated everyone like insignificant characters, clenching his fist forcefully so that a mark was left on the ground. Aiden endured it. But he was hurt by the words that those guys were afraid of the karma penalty. Otherwise, they would not have held back. A little red-haired girl looked out from the corner. She wanted to run up to her brother, but was careful. Meanwhile, the guy wiped his face with his sleeve so that the girl wouldn't see him. Alice ran up to the guy. She wanted to help him with something, but the guy got angry. She couldn't go down. She began to wipe her brother's face with her napkin. The little girl didn't understand why this was happening to him, because he didn't break the sword on purpose. They were happy, sister and brother, warm day, a lot of laughter. There was some fun in their difficult life. Swimming out of his memories to where the particles leave him, he clenched his teeth with force, thinking of something. The system moderator tilted his head to the side, thinking that something was wrong, some kind of nonsense. Aiden's eyes turned red and tears flowed, and he screamed at the moderator so loudly that he staggered. The young man fell apart. The moderator stood and watched. He remembered the promise made before he disappeared. Aiden flew down for an unknown length of time. He flew with his back into the abyss, his silhouette glowing as a black dot. Suddenly, in all this emptiness, a hand reached out. The hand was with a scarlet weave. It was reaching somewhere. A hand reached out to Aiden's forehead and touched it. It was so unexpected that it excited him. Without understanding how he ended up on the surface again, the young man watched the dark figures move away, and he remained sitting in the very place where he was. A scoreboard appeared in front of him. Then another and another. He looked dumbfounded and did not understand what it meant and how he managed to return. Pants in forest, people strolled leisurely. Each of them had their own business. Tents were pitched near the path. The player in armor was indignant. He was hoping for an upgrade. The old one was 100 years ago, but it didn't work out for him. The players stood near the tents and were indignant. It was loud. They did not understand why it was necessary to carry out the check. A lot of people gathered. Everyone stood and watched how the sword was forged. The sledgehammer was lowered so that sparks splashed in all directions. The players have gathered. They ask each other what is happening. The event is taking place. Aiden stood. He had a sledgehammer in his hands. He was holding an event, increasing the level of sharpening, spending only gold. Some young man was happy, if not now, then when he had such an opportunity, he succeeded. All the players rushed to Aiden's tent, vying with each other to offer whatever money they wanted, just to level up their skills. An unfamiliar young man pushed forward, pushing others out of his way. He was rude and impolite. Having pushed the players aside, he stood in front of Aiden. Now it was his turn, demanding. He thought that the one who sharpened him would not recognize him. But he recognized this man. His eyes widened. A memory surfaced in his head. The memory of how he was humiliated, beaten, and once almost killed. And the man laughed, because he is not a game character. The man placed a whole bag of weapons on the table in front of Aiden and ordered him to improve it all. The players began to be indignant and curse, but they remembered that by fighting they could lower their karma. They calmed down. No one wanted to deal with them. The insolent man looked up at the young man. He recognized him, began to speak to his comrade, but he did not remember him. Aiden's face turned black. The pupils of his eyes became round when the two made a bad joke about his little sister. He grabbed the sledgehammer tighter, the veins on his arm tightening and becoming visible. Meanwhile, the man was happy. He was sure that if he managed to sharpen at least one sword, he would already be in the black. But his partner was worried about his condition. He could have walked around the world, but the first one calmed him down, believing that there was no room for panic. Aiden listened to the men. He was not distracted from his work, sharpening his sword, but he became increasingly gloomy. Gritting his teeth tightly, the young man swung and hit the sword with all his might. The sharpening was unsuccessful. The equipment was destroyed. Aiden did it. Anger and resentment took possession of him. As soon as the man saw this, he was covered in a hail of sweat. He looked at all the destroyed weapons and did not believe it. Aiden just closed his eyes to all this and laughed loudly, admitting that he was inept. The players who saw this began to laugh, covering their mouths with their palms. They were surprised that they could not sharpen anything. The insolent man swore at the young man and headed towards him, but the question about money made him stop and fall into a stupor. His friend reminded him about the money. He remembered the promise to return it several times. The first one was confused. He had no money. Pointing his finger at Aiden, he shouted that this boy was to blame for everything, but the second one did not believe him. A fight would have broken out, but the people dispersed them. They were impatient to sharpen their knives. Night fell. The moon was shining, illuminating the roofs of the house. Lights in the rooms began to light up in the houses. Aiden opened the door to the room. A bag was hanging on his shoulder. He entered abruptly. His face did not express any emotion. He sat down on the sofa, tired. The day was finally over. The bag stood next to him. There was gold in the bag, a lot of gold, enough for him not to worry about anything. Aiden thought about it. He held one event. Now he needs to collect the reward. It was all unexpected for him. Delving into his memories, the young man remembered how the scoreboard appeared in front of him, how he was at a loss as to what awaited him next. He saw the ability of the moderator. He could even use this skill. Sweat flowed down his temple. He stared without stopping. When the indicators in the past were revealed to him, he was scared and did not know how or what to do. But the thing was that non-player characters do not receive tasks. Only the moderator could do this. His face darkening, Aiden had many questions, all of which remained unanswered. The young man, full of determination, pressed the done button and he appeared on the screen. Now he is a player. I looked at the monitor, sweat rolled down my cheek. Nothing should happen. The level of authority has increased. Aiden is still too weak. He looked at the levels of other players out of the corner of his eye. He will not be able to defeat even a beginner. They added a quest to him. He needs to find an Easter egg. The young man thought about it. It's like a treasure hunt, but he is unsure. He got up and went to leave the room. He must survive, and therefore he needs quests. He went out. A light pole was visible outside the city. In the morning, our character will go for an Easter egg. Morning, forest, and a volcano ahead. Everything enjoys calm, peace, and purity. Beauty untouched by the players. Aiden dressed up, wearing a cloak and sheathing a sword. He came to where the Easter egg was. In front of him was a huge tree and a door in the tree. He needed to go into the dungeon. Everything was terribly interesting and new for the hero. The place where players went down to improve their abilities? This place was called a dungeon. Aiden got there and he couldn't believe it. The character was absorbed in his own affairs and did not look around at all. He was followed by a shadow hidden behind a tree. Behind the tree was a female image, dark, not visible. She was looking at the guy. The young man raised his head and looked admiringly at the majestic door, the hem of his cloak fluttering in the wind. Aiden persuaded himself not to be afraid, because what would happen to him when he went there, he couldn't lose his head. Opening the doors, Aiden made up his mind and went inside, gradually moving away. And despite the fact that a higher level is needed to pass, the young man was able to pass because the moderator's ability allowed him to do this. Monsters, toothy, red without eyes, they sat on the rocks. There were a lot of them, waiting with their mouths open. Aiden could hear growls and sounds of struggle. He walked forward but was very afraid. He almost got caught, amazed that players always have to encounter such monsters. The hero walked along a long white corridor, and on the sides there were monsters on the islands. Aiden followed the signs, just followed them, stuck his hand into the wall, and it went inside. Passing by the monsters, the young man felt as if he was in another world. And this was an unusual road. A gate with the number 1 suddenly appeared in front of him, and the hero stopped. He put his palms to the walls, tried to move them, applied force, pressed, but they did not give in. He opened his scoreboard. If he got here, he won't turn back, the character thought decisively. Aiden unlocked yesterday's ability. As soon as he clicked on it, light poured out and it became bright. Then the doors opened, so easily, the young man stood and watched, his black silhouette shining from the side. As soon as he entered, light suddenly poured out, so bright that the guy raised his hand and covered himself with it. Aiden stood in front of the stairs, at the top of which there was something on a pedestal, bright, burning. Coming closer, the young man saw that same egg. He did not take his eyes off, looking at it. Something went wrong. An explosion was heard behind him. The young man had to bend down so that nothing would hit him. From what he saw, he fell to the floor, opened his mouth. Everything was in smoke, but he saw the figure in front of him. A huge red knight with horns appeared in front of him. He had seen one like this during the cleansing of their village. The magical creature appeared too unexpectedly. The sharp blade of the sword cut his hand. Blood dripped from the wound. Aiden screamed. It hurt. The magical creature was moving after the young man. His sword was ready. He wanted to strike. The next blow fell on the cheekbone. There was a streak of blood. He clenched his teeth in pain and closed his eyes. Another blow and a torn sleeve. The sword reached the skin and left its mark. Aiden's patience came to an end. The creature inflicted cut after cut. The young man's back was already pressed against the wall. There was fear in his eyes. The magical creature stopped a couple of steps from the guy. It was ready to finish its job to the end. Aiden had nothing more to lose, so he grabbed the hilt of the sword and began to pull it out of its sheath. On his wrist hung the last thing that was left of his sister, a bracelet. Drawing his sword, the young man rushed forward, shouting and calling for an attack, his mouth open and his eyes blazing with anger. The creature with horns didn't have to wait long. It swung at the young man. Aiden barely repelled the blows. His face blackened. He could not hold out for long. He gathered all his strength and tried. Gritting his teeth, he rushed forward towards the monster, decided to attack him, not knowing what could happen to him. He ran. The magical creature with burning eyes put its sword forward. It also did not retreat and waited for the attack. The creature's sword wounded the young man in the shoulder. He screamed, jerked his head, and blood flowed. Despite the pain, he tightened his grip on the hilt of the sword. His hand trembled, but this did not stop him. Unexpectedly, Aiden plunged a sharp sword straight into the throat of the magical creature and dealt a strong blow. The head flew away from the creature's body. The young man had not yet let go of the sword and was holding it as if in an attack. A magical creature without a head stood in front of him. There was a hole in the place. It sparkled. The guy was confused. Suddenly, Aiden received a strong blow to the face. He did not notice who it was. He felt pain. This blow was dealt by the monster. He was empty inside, so it was difficult to kill him. Groping for his head, he picked it up and put it in its place. Falling and hitting his back against the wall, Aiden knew he couldn't handle it. He lowered his head and was about to give up. Memories flashed with pictures. Here he was offended. Here he was with his little sister in his arms. Here was the moderator. He experienced a lot of pain all the time. And of course his sister, who asked him to survive at any cost at the moment when she was cleared. From his bosom, the guy took out his working tool, a sledgehammer, and squeezed it tightly in his hand. He got up, stood up, his figure was dark. Only his eyes sparkled with anger. With a sledgehammer in his hand, he was again ready to attack. His eyes are widened. He realized that if he survives, he will become closer to his goal. And here again, opposite each other, ready to attack, the magical creature and the young man, they will fight to the end. There was a ringing sound. The sledgehammer met the sword, the attackers grappled with each other. And the sledgehammer broke the sword of the magical creature into small parts. Fragments of the sword flew in all directions, hitting the floor and ringing. The creature raised his sword up. The system recognizes it not as a magical creature, but as a tool. The guy became interested. Without stopping, Aiden decides that this is his chance, and he needs to take advantage of it. He goes on the attack, raising the sledgehammer to strike. And he succeeded. He struck blow after blow, and the creature crumbled, the hand flying off from the first blow. When only a small part of what was a warrior remained, Aiden raised the sledgehammer over his head for the final blow, the finishing blow. After all the blows, the young man sat down. He had no strength. He was covered in wounds from which blood flowed. He decided to rest a little. All that was left of the magical creature was garbage. The sledgehammer did a great job with it. Aiden sat next to him and looked at it all. He succeeded. The Easter egg was waiting for him to be taken. The quest must be completed. The young man was engulfed in a glow. His powers increased because he completed the quest. Covered in abrasions and wounds, he looked at his new ability, which appeared after the result of the fight. He left the dungeon, holding his shoulder. His appearance was terrible. His cloak was torn and there was blood. He felt very bad. Beads of sweat rolled down his face. He was exhausted. Weakness overtook him, and he fell to the ground, losing consciousness, with his arms and legs outstretched, his face on the ground. A figure in black rose in front of him. She approached quietly and stood looking at the young man. She took off her hood. It was a beautiful girl. With blue hair and blue eyes, she was looking down. A small blue ball appeared at the battle site. The ball had a camera eye. He scanned the entire area, paying special attention to the former magical creature. Data was transmitted that the dungeon keeper was destroyed and traces of a bug were visible. The threat level was low. The ball disappeared. He teleported to report the situation. Everything remained the same as before. The girl stood in front of the lion guy and looked at the ability board, right in front of the entrance to the dungeon. With a heavy sigh, Aiden opened his eyes. Everything hurt. He clenched his teeth and came to his senses. The young man felt that someone was taking his hand and lifting it, forcing him to press something. Aiden saw the girl, jumped away from her, screamed, got scared, wanted to know who it was. The girl leaned over and looked at him. She straightened up, raised her hand to her chest and introduced herself. It was Ari, a girl with blue hair. The young man was surprised. She was a player and there was slight alarm. Having looked at her karma, he was amazed even more. What an absurdity! The girl stood with her arms outstretched and smiled welcomingly. I concluded for myself that this girl was dangerous, but the girl had already closed her eyes, still smiling sweetly, and darkness was spreading behind her. Aiden did not understand what Ari needed from him. He sat without taking his eyes off her. The girl stood. She laughed and admitted that she had cured him. Although she didn't have many potions, but she shared a couple. Aiden couldn't believe it. He touched his shoulder, which no longer had wounds, and he felt much better. Ari admitted that she had not met anyone like him. She became curious, so she showed kindness. The young man did not understand her, but a burning poster suddenly appeared in front of him. He looked straight at it. The quest again. The guy was surprised that it appeared right now. It was quite strange. Only he saw the quest window. Leaning on his knee, the young man stood up. He had no desire to get involved with strange players. He needed to leave quickly. He began to leave, thanked him for his help, and hoped that the girl would not ask for anything in return. Ari stood and looked after the young man, resting her chin on her fist. He was very interested in her. Stopping, Aiden pointed his finger at the girl. She was chasing him, and he wanted her to stop. Laughing, Eri wanted to go with him, and did not understand why she couldn't do this. The girl's open face did not cause any fear. Aiden didn't like the fact that an unfamiliar girl was following him around. He turned to face her and began to swear. They became friends. Although the guy did not remember when they managed to do this, Eri laughed, considering him a good friend, and her help in case of anything would not be superfluous. Hearing that he was in great danger, he was surprised. His eyes widened. He did not expect danger. Ari pointed her finger somewhere behind his back and asked him to turn around. There was something there. A huge animal was rushing towards them. With an open, toothy mouth, long hair, it ran and had no intention of stopping. Aiden screamed, clenched his teeth, and, by inertia, stuck his hand into his inventory, looking for something suitable for him. He swung his hand, and the wolf fell and blood dripped from the wound, and the young man stumbled and began to fall backwards. The animal lay on the ground. There were other wolves around it. They all sniffed the lying one. Aiden stood with a sword in his hands. Wolves surrounded him on all sides, slowly approaching, about to attack. The young man kept his sword ready. He did not understand where so many magical creatures had come from. They smelled the smell of blood that remained on Aiden's clothes, and he decided to look at his wounds. Ari was sitting on a tree stump. She smiled and offered her help to the guy, but he waved her off and refused. Grasping the hilt of the sword tightly with both hands, the young man had to kill these animals himself in order to complete the quest. He had no other way to become stronger. Aiden swung his hand and rushed forward at the magical creatures, who opened their mouths and reached out to him. A large room with a window covering the entire wall, with a large table in the middle and chairs. A man sat at the head, resting his cheek with his hand, thinking about something, twirling a ball in his other hand. The ball on the hand shared information that the Easter egg was missing. It was clear that the man was lazy. He didn't think that it could be stolen. It was necessary to kill the keeper of the dungeon. The magical creature was equipped with the armor of immortals. In theory, it should not have been defeated. The man leaned on and began to rise. He needed to check everything personally to make sure what had happened. It was Luke, the system operator, a man with blonde hair and a tired face. Aiden beat and beat with his sword magical creatures that continually attacked him, replacing each other. He fought briskly. The magical creatures lay defeated, streams of blood flowing from their mouths. The young man leaned on the sword. He defeated all the magical creatures, and now he had no strength left. Aiden exhaled. He was surprised at himself that he was a non-player character and was able to defeat so many creatures. The ability that he unlocked was very good. Who would have thought that this would happen? He looked at the scoreboard of his skills. You need to be careful with your abilities, otherwise the consequences will not keep you waiting. The young man became curious about what other abilities could be unlocked, although editing was great. He carefully looked at his data. It was not clear why his level did not change and his experience points did not increase. In order to become stronger in this world, he must increase his level by continuing to look at his board. You can increase your level in several ways. One of the ways is to complete a quest. Tasks are given, and you need to follow them. The second way is to defeat a magical creature. A dragon and a crowd of people attack it. His face looked a little surprised. Something was wrong here. Something was obviously wrong. Ari sat and looked at the guy. She rested her cheek on her hand and watched his actions. Following his logic, for several days Aiden fought with magical creatures. He was attacked by wolves, monsters with horns of different colors. He had no choice. Other characters did not give him tasks, and Ari followed him everywhere, watched and smiled. But no matter how many monsters Aiden killed, no matter how many commands he entered, the level was absolutely in no hurry to increase. It dawned on our character only after everything. After killing everyone, he stood alone at sunset with a sword in his hand. All non-player characters cannot surpass themselves. They will remain as they are. But here are the players chosen by the system, the chosen ones. They can improve their skills, their abilities. Aiden sat near the lighted fire. He was tormented by thoughts that his fate was to remain on the outskirts of development. Closing his eyes and resting his head on his hand, the young man thought what he should do now because he must go to his goal. There must be a way out. Ari turned to him. The guy threw his head back, opened one eye and stared at her. The girl sat and ate. She laughed and asked to add her as a friend. The hero exhaled. He was dissatisfied. They were in the forest, sitting in front of the fire, and Aiden was cursing. He didn't want the girl to follow him everywhere and all the time, but she just grinned. Ari's question made the guy confused. He needs to become stronger. He craves it. She knew how to level up faster. The hero turned to her and began to listen to her with his mouth open. The girl stood up, folded her arms over her chest. She was sure that the level could be raised within the framework of team play. Aiden's eyes were directed at Ari. He didn't believe what he heard, but he couldn't handle it alone. The young man agreed. The girl's eyes widened in surprise. She didn't think that she would give her consent to pair work so quickly. He looked away and confirmed that he agreed, although he himself did not understand exactly what team play meant. Happy Eri pounced on Aiden. She laughed and couldn't believe that he gave his consent, but he shrank all over and clenched his teeth. The bright moon was shining. Smoke from the fire was hanging over the forest. The mountains were towering, and you could only hear the conversation of two people. Eri stood in front with a knife in her hands. Aiden stood behind her and watched. This is called accelerating a friend. The girl turned her head to the guy, and in front of her were giant magical creatures. She advised him not to move, otherwise he might die. Eri pouted. She only helps her friends, and Aiden doesn't even want to add her. The young man peered at the data. If you look at the behavior, then for her hunting is not a difficult matter. It's common. The hero thought that the only way he could earn experience points was by working in tandem with this girl. The player walked towards the monsters. She spread her arms to the sides with knives and was ready to fight. She jumped towards the monsters and began to attack one after another. Her movements were sharp and hit the target immediately. Aiden was jubilant. He succeeded. The levels increased. He even clenched his fist with joy. They were busy with the joyful event that the level had increased, and did not notice at all how the ball was following them. He scanned the young man and discovered a bug. Now he had the data and could return to the owner. Ari fought with monsters. The young man assumed that she was strong, but did not think that she was that strong. But Aiden doubted the girl, why she followed him, what she wanted. He could not understand this. A ball was peeking out from behind the rock. The young man did not notice it, but the player saw it. She realized that he was sniffing out something. Aiden looked at the accrual of level and experience, how many days he lost in vain, and now everything has passed quickly. He longed for some new ability. He had a reward. He looked at his panel. The character lost sight of Ari, began calling her, screaming, because she promised to speed him up. There was a broken ball lying on the ground. It had been cut open, but it was still trying to convey a warning. He tried to warn until the last moment, but Ari's raised foot interrupted his attempts, stepped on and crushed the ball. The girl looked down from above. Without removing her leg, she didn't know what it was, but it bothered her. Ari beamed. The young man finally accepted her friendship. She folded her hands and pressed them to her face with emotion. Aiden didn't like that the girl was too loud, but he needed her, so he accepted her friendship. They began to travel together, with a player they met by chance. This time they walked along the road past the mills. He used the award he received thanks to Ari in editing. The young man received a very good class change, and now he moved away from the male and female NPCs. Now the system could recognize him as a player, although he was not one. But he was no longer a non-player character. Aiden could fight creatures and level up even if he was alone. Raising his hand, the young man believed that he had become stronger. He was no longer who he was before, completely different. Clenching his hand into a fist and looking at her, he regretted that he was not strong enough when it was necessary. Having darkened his face, the hero remembered his little sister with red hair. Her pure, innocent face froze in his memory. Suddenly, Aiden stopped. The breeze blew yellow leaves towards him. He looked to the side. Ari noticed that something was wrong with the guy, looked at him, called him by name, but he did not respond. Without hearing the girl's words, Aiden began to run across the green field, so that the hem of his cloak fluttered as he ran. Braking sharply, the guy looked straight. He was in the middle of the field. Flowers were growing nearby. Leaves were flying in different directions. What Aiden saw was the clearing of the village. The canopy was thrown. He stood and watched. Ari ran up to him. The two of them looked at the bad sector. The girl was going to tell us more about it. The zone that the moderator cleared and left, and it became itself, an empty space of the system. Aiden stood and watched when he heard that someone could get out of there, and he was surprised. The character began to descend, looked at his feet. Ari stood and did not understand where he was going. Aiden was about to go there. The girl ran after him and asked him to wait for her too. They stopped right in front of the iridescent curtain, a bad sector, and watched. The young man felt sad, because the place where he lived had become somewhat similar to this. He extended his hand and wanted to touch the wall. The girl clapped her hands. She wanted to go inside. As soon as you put your hand on the wall of this place, red color flooded where the young man's hand was. The guy's tenacity had no equal. A passage opened under his hand, through which one could pass. Ari jumped behind him, putting her hands on Aiden's shoulders. She wanted to go there together. The guy didn't understand why the player was clinging to him, because she could come in on her own. The hero looked sideways at her. He wanted her to leave him behind. Only moderators and operators could enter the sector. The two of them entered a bad sector, but no one knew why they needed it, so they just walked. Aiden walked forward, not paying attention to the surrounding space. He had no need to come here, but something pulled him. They saw something. The guy took his sword out of its sheath, a bracelet hung on his wrist. The memory of his sister is now always with him. A shadow was visible among the stones ahead. The sword was ready. The hope was that it was a wild beast. The hero raised his sword to strike. Something shook. It could have been a magical creature. This is not at all what Aiden expected to see. A boy sat in front of him, covering his head with his hands. The little boy was shaking with fear. Suddenly, a ringing sound was heard. It was a bullet flying towards the baby. It rang loudly in the silence. Aiden gritted his teeth, raised his sword, and the bullet hit the sword and was thrown to the side. Looking up, the young man saw a figure with a weapon in his hands, which was already lowered down. This man, a man, was holding a weapon in his hands and calling out to a boy. His name was Henry. But the boy grabbed the man with a strong grip, but curiosity was strong, and he looked out to look at the guy and the girl. The man and the child had not seen the players here for a long time, so they treated them with caution. He was interested in how they got here. Aiden looked at the man. He did not put his sword away, but his gaze had already softened. The man thought that the young man seemed suspicious, but there was no danger from him. Ari stood nearby. A grin appeared on her face. She was up to something. Power appeared behind her. The man looked at the girl, and his face looked frightened. Sweat began to flow in droplets. His eyes widened. Henry was worried about his uncle. He was surprised by the adult's reaction. He saw how scared he was. The girl's energy makes her shiver. The man had never seen anything like this before, so he was scared. What would happen if a girl considered a man and a child to be enemies? But Ari smiled, showing her palms. Aiden looked at her. Then another person interrupted them. Turning to the man, all four looked at him. Another man ran towards them. He wanted to inform Jack, the man with the child, that they had problems. He ran quickly and shouted loudly. But when he saw the players, the man suddenly braked and grabbed his chest. He didn't understand how they ended up here. Hearing the problem, Jack's face changed as Elena's symptoms worsened. A half-cleared tree and house, the moderator left traces after the clearing, but this place still existed. Jack ran sharply, opening the door with his hand. Into the room, he let out the air from his fast run. There was a maid in the room who was sitting near the bed, and on the bed lay a woman covered with a blanket up to her chin. Jack didn't understand. He shouted what happened. There were no prerequisites. Two figures appeared in the doorway. The two in the doorway were Aiden and Ari. She was looking at the young man, and an order was heard in the room for Elena to wake up. A girl was lying on the bed with her eyes closed. She had purple lines on her head and neck. She was sick, but the illness was unusual. Aiden turned gloomy. He saw the warning, and now he could not take his eyes off the girl. The warning said about a new quest. The new quest found a bug that posed a low threat and needed to be destroyed. It was Elena, by this bug. Jack screamed. He wanted a way to help the girl. He didn't want to accept that nothing could be done. Suddenly, pushing the adults to the bed, Henry begged in tears. He shouted the girl's name and already ran up to her. But before the boy had time to sit down next to the girl, his uncle grabbed him by the hand. He was angry. He did not want the boy to be allowed here. Ari silently approached and looked at the girl. Jack and the maid recoiled from her in fear. Elena is very bad, the girl thinks. The player came closer to the girl. Jack tearfully asked to help her. She would be able to do something. What Ari said made everyone present's mouths open. They were dumbfounded. It was not a disease. It was a bug. The man screamed. He couldn't believe his ears. This simply couldn't be. The girl turned to him. Jack screamed so that sweat ran down his cheek and droplets and wrinkles gathered on his forehead. Their edges turned into something incomprehensible. But no one resists the system. There is nowhere for a bug to come from. Ari began to explain that bugs do not only appear in cases of resistance. There are different types of bugs. The worse it gets, the more damage it causes to the surrounding area. While Jack listened and his face darkened at the exit, hiding behind the door, someone stood and clenched his fist in his hand. Then this hiding person couldn't control his emotions and slammed his fist on the wall so that he left a mark. It was Aiden, who gritted his teeth in anger and is now being offered to destroy this little child. He stared at the board where the quest was and his face darkened with every word. The choice was to use the moderator's abilities or not. The man refused to complete this quest and will face a fine for failure to complete it. Aiden turned completely black. He understood why he was brought here for this mission, because he could not refuse. The man was angry. He would not be like him. He hit the board with the task, breaking it into pieces. He straightened up, looked straight, clenched his hand into a fist, clenched his teeth. He was ready to destroy everyone. While everyone was talking, Aiden appeared on the threshold. He held his hand on the doorframe. He went inside, walked through. The people in the room turned to him. He ordered everyone to get out and resolutely walked forward. Jack screamed, "No one knows if there is a way to cure Elena, but Aiden will look and try." The boy grabbed the cloak from his back and squeezed it tightly. He tearfully asked to save his little sister. Aiden walked over to the bed where Elena was lying, raised his hand above her. He looked intently at the girl. People in the room stood and looked at what the guy was doing, and he sat down next to the girl and a glow began to emanate from his hand. Their mouths opened in surprise. People were watching him. They did not understand what was happening. Aiden got inside the space of the system. He couldn't see the end. He looked around. He stood and looked at the girl. If he got here, he must find a way to save her. Elena lay with her eyes closed, long purple threads stretching from her body. She was a bug, a mistake as a result of resistance to the system. Raising his sword, he swung it and cut through the threads that were clinging to the girl. Aiden wanted to separate Elena from the system completely and recreate it. He could save her. He looked at the floating girl. There was a red aura around her, the same as that of the hero himself. The young man looked around. He saw all the people who were in the room, and blue threads stretched from them. It was a system. Aiden pulled out his sword and rushed to chop the blue threads. He was against the system and wanted to make the people in the room independent of it. Ari was surprised. She looked at it all with wide eyes. She didn't know how possible this was in principle. The men in the room covered their faces. They were scared and didn't quite understand what was happening. A bright flash illuminated everyone. It went over the edge, so much so that it blew off the roof of the house. But the red light continued to flow. It engulfed the entire village and broke the canvas, which was considered a bad sector. Aiden appeared. He exhaled, his hands clenched into fists, the sword already put away. A board with his abilities appeared in front of the young man, and he began to peer into it. Aiden laughed out loud. He needed to remove the bug, not the child. New abilities were added. He was getting stronger. The air left his mouth, sweat ran down his cheek. It was a test. He was being tested like that. They all stood in front of a high rock, all from the room. Ari pointed upward with her hand. Blue liquid was flowing. Someone's hand was holding a bottle of liquid. A voice said that enough was enough. It was Ari who poured the healing potion on Aiden. He kicked and waved his arms. He had had enough. Cupping the man's face with both hands, she looked at him, wanting to make sure that everything was all right with him. She said that she was scared for him, that he was a very important person for her. But there was only one thing in her head. Where did he get so much power from? And where could it lead him? Pushing the girl away from him, removing her hands, they called him, and he turned his head to the one who needed him. All the people stood in front of him. They thanked him for his help. The rescued girl was hiding behind her uncle, but stuck her head out. She was curious. They didn't know how to thank him. But then the scoreboard appeared again in front of Aiden, and he began to watch. Surprisingly, the people in front of him were no longer non-player characters. But after the update, they became free people. Each of them had their own level and background. Some had been a captain in the past. Some had been a watchman. Some had been a nurse. He stood and looked at the update. They were all free people, and he was the moderator of the village. Aiden remembered what he saw. People resisted, so he separated them from the system. He looked at the threads of people, having saved them from the system. Something else awakened. It was biding its time. Something else decided to intervene. It was gradually approaching Aiden. Seeing this, the young man immediately felt that this was the source of all the problems, so he rushed towards him. With his sword, he ran and cut the purple threads that brought problems. Aiden fought the bug. He floated with a red aura and holding his sword at the ready, determined to see his job through to the end. And he succeeded. The threads connecting the people were broken, but now red threads were coming from them, and they were heading towards the man. The guy looked at these threads that stuck into him. Now, for some unknown reason, he was connected with these people. Jack turned to the hero. They were now NPCs. He looked at him. The man wanted to know if the guy was the operator, after all. He saved them through the system. The operators are selected by the moderator from the best players. Luke was one of them. Jack bowed his head and closed his eyes. They now owed a huge debt to the young man. They knelt down and asked to join them. Jack was speechless from what he saw and heard and opened his mouth. He stood and was silent. Aiden was confused. He did not know these people, and he was not an operator, but it was the will of the people themselves. They wanted it and desired it. They also dumbfounded the young man by the fact that he was now the owner of this place. Two shadows, moving away from the people, decided what to do. They wanted to say that he was a moderator, but no one knew whether this would be appropriate. Ari put her small hand on Aiden's shoulder. It reminded him of what he did for people. She whispered in her ear that no matter what the young man's decision was, they would accept it, because he saved them. The girl smiled. Their fate was already predetermined. There is no need to rack your brains. You need to do what you think is necessary. She spread her arms to the sides. Aiden looked at her. Sometimes Ari's words made her feel like she knew everything. The young man decided to act as he wished. He also listened to the girl. People looked at the young man, waiting for his decision. He wanted to give them what they needed. A table with various foods, hot dishes, drinks, salads, and various sauces appeared in front of them. They looked at the table enthusiastically. The children's eyes shone. The men each took a mug with a drink. They watched silently while the others were happy to hope. They had not eaten normal food for so long. Jack thanked Aiden for sharing his supplies with them. He was beginning to worry about the children since they had little food left. The children laughed. They ate. The nurse and the watchman looked and smiled. This food would last them a long time. Raising the mug to his mouth, the guy asked how long the village had been in this state. Jack was sure that it used to be a good place to live. A majestic castle, the village was not rich but beautiful. Even players came here. The wooden buildings were all intact, neat and clean. One day there was a check and the monsters, led by the moderator, came down to clean up. They went and destroyed everything. Frightened, they were already tired of fighting. An unknown wanderer helped them but did not remove them. The hooded man grinned and saved several people with his magical power. His face could not be seen. Jack raised the mug to his mouth in order to survive in captivity here. They were trying their best. Aiden listened to everything and looked at him for a long time. Hearing the word family, the guy plunged into memories where he was with his sister, and he also had a family. Ari stood with her elbows on the railing and looked carefully at Aiden. She saw how his facial expressions changed. Suddenly, a chest appeared. The chest stood near the wall and shone. This light attracted the attention of the characters. The girl took her chin. She saw the chest, her eyes shone, and she herself was pleased. Pretending that she had just seen the chest, she attracted the attention of other people, screamed loudly, and pointed her finger at it. Everyone stared at the chest. It looked pretty decent for the area. The chest was a storage unit that could only be used by players. It was connected by a system and could be located anywhere. The watchman knew all this, since he was guarding the vault, and the cunning Ari smiled looking at the men. Aiden looked at the chest. He heard that the system does not allow it to open, so it has been standing here for a long time. He walked up to the chest, sat down next to it, asked the others to move away and began to try to open it. The young man knew that players collect rare items, and perhaps he has such a chance now. The chest was opened using the moderator's abilities, unlocking the skill. Aiden lifted the lid. The whole room was illuminated with light, and he could not take his eyes off what was inside. There was everything there, all kinds of equipment, uniforms, weapons, coins, and potions, and he could use as much as he wanted. The rest of the people opened their mouths at what they saw. They were shocked and stood watching without blinking. Jack and the watchman picked up weapons for themselves. They were not very confident and doubted whether they could do it or not. Aiden reassured them all. There are enough resources. There is no need for any excitement. Let this be his gift. Holding his sledgehammer in his hand, the man decided that the found weapon would not be in vain. They could use it. The bags contained provisions, apples, grain, cereals. All this should last them a long time. There was gold in other bags. There were several such bags, so there was no need to worry about finances either. Ari also wanted to get something. She looked into Aiden's face, but he decided that she already had everything, plenty of everything. The young man thought that he received a lot of things, food and cool weapons that were powerful. The players didn't see anything of their own in the vault because Aiden took everything and didn't care that it was someone else's. The players will write a complaint to the operators. As a result, they will receive compensation, so everything will be fine, the guy reassured himself. The most important prize was on his hand. It was a round funnel that seemed to lead to another world. It was a cloud storage, where you could store and retrieve anything at any time. The young man was pleased with this find. After examining the things, Aiden decided to put his hand deeper into the chest to see if there was anything else left there. Suddenly, he began to synchronize with the system. He could not pull back the hand that he had put into check. With his other hand, he grabbed the side of the chest. Panic seized him. Aiden pulled his hand back with all his strength, but he couldn't pull it out. He was all red for too long. Finally, he was able to pull his hand out so abruptly that he fell with his back on the floor, and black threads stretched out of the chest behind him. The young man rose heavily. He made sounds of pain, and Ari looked at him with her head turned to the side. Aiden looked at his hand. Something like this is hard to imagine, but his hand shone with a golden color. Everything shimmered and sparkled. Now he could use the storage whenever he wanted, at any moment. He couldn't believe it when he opened his mouth. The people gathered, led by Jack, and they expressed their gratitude to Aiden. They wanted a task. They are ready to do whatever the young man asks because he did a lot for them. The young man dumbfounded them with the information that they were now non-player characters and did not have to follow orders. They were now free, and he was leaving. Besides, the villagers were afraid. Looking at each other, Jack was not very happy, and Aiden wanted to leave this place as quickly as possible. A few days later, a check will come. Magical creatures will descend again and scan the area, looking for a bug. The villagers of Air were sad, but the guy was doing it for them. He didn't want to put them in danger, because the moderator marked him as a mistake. Aiden was indignant. He doesn't need sad faces. In fact, he needs to move on, and he's not leaving forever. He doesn't even have his own home. The young man gave hope to these nice people while they had time to take care of themselves. Aiden and Ari were leaving. The residents saw them off, watched as these two left. They would wait for their return. Walking along the road, the girl was at a loss as to why they left the village so early, because they could have stayed there. Forcing himself to calm down, the guy closed his eyes. The answer should satisfy her. But Ari was already beginning to guess that they did not leave so easily. Isn't that what players do? At this, the girl stopped and changed her face because Aiden was not a player. Realizing what had just happened, the guy got scared. His eyes widened, and he stopped for a few seconds. Ari watched his reaction and was curious, so she put her fingers under her chin and listened. The girl doubled over from loud laughter. She laughed so hard that tears came to her eyes. She laughed at the fact that the guy thought all this time that he looked like a player. Aiden looked at her without looking away. Her revelations were a complete surprise. If he had been a player, she would not have pestered him, and would not have become friends. Bent over with laughter, Ari wiped away the tears that had come out. The guy was interested in how long she had known his secret. The player delved into her memories, raised her finger to her lips, and turned her gaze to the side. In a black cloak, hiding behind a rock, she watched as Aiden ran, and around him the place was cleared by the moderator. Grabbing his forehead, he closed his eyes. She knew everything from the very beginning, from that very village of his. Hearing what Ari was saying, the young man removed his hand. He looked at her carefully. She promised to do everything for him. She could make sure that no one would remove him. The girl came closer, put her hands on the guy's shoulders. Neither the operator nor the moderator could touch him. Aiden's surprise knew no bounds. He looked at the player, thought about her words, and many questions arose in his mind. Suddenly, a bright red flash appeared in front of the guy's face. This was the beginning of an emergency check. The countdown began. Ari was worried. She went to the young man, and he was confused as to why the check was happening so early. The sun was shining, and the guy was blacker than a cloud. He realized that this was not a regular check, but an emergency one. There was little time left. Aiden clenched his hand into a fist. He was both scared and angry because he did not know why the check was starting. Ari was dumbfounded. She didn't know that the guy could see this. Now he needs to behave just like an ordinary player. They had no time left. Ari became calm and advised Aiden to calm down too. A dark veil fell over them, covering the sun. The young man peered up. He was scared. The last test had not gone very well. Aiden rose up, floated, and began to collapse. Pieces of him began to fly off. He let out a scream. He was glowing and wanted to get out, but nothing worked. Arya folded her hands on her chest and looked at him. The girl looked and behaved calmly at the man's panic. She advised him to just wait. Ari kept waiting. The guy was no longer there. He was transported upward by a light point, and the girl stood and waited. The man fell with his back on the floor. His legs hung in the air for some time. It was painful and unexpected. A picture opened in front of the hero that he did not expect to see. He was sitting on a hill, and in front of him was a crowd of people. They were all walking back and forth. Having looked closer, he did not know this place. There were only players here. They were laughing, getting into verbal altercations with each other. He kept wondering where the players went during the check, but it turns out they were transported to neutral territory. The man was in the distance. He had never seen so many players. He wanted to go down and find out some information. The hero remembered that Ari asked him to wait, but it was not known when she would appear. So now he peered at where the players were. The young man finally came down and felt very uncomfortable standing in this crowd. He heard laughter and conversations, but did not know what to do next. He felt sad. He thought that he had become stronger, but now he looked at the top players and realized that he was not quite strong yet. The players were arguing. They had their own affairs, but because of the check, they could not go to carry them out. Folding his arms across his chest, he was interested in when the check would end. He would also like to find Arya. He had too many questions for her. Aiden heard a conversation between two men, that the check would end soon. He listened. They were indignant that they did not warn, that they checked too often. What they were looking for was not clear. Just thinking about not causing inconvenience to anyone and not getting into anything, The guy accidentally bumped into someone with his elbow. The man with yellow hair reacted too sharply, and now Aiden was already in the grip. Someone else's hands clenched around his neck. He grabbed them, but did not have time to say anything. Aiden knew people like him, so he decided not to react to him, remained silent and waited. The man with yellow hair swung his fist at the guy. He will endure it, and soon it will end. But the fist did not reach the target. It was intercepted by the hand of another person. A cheerful guy stopped his fist. He spoke freely, tried to resolve the conflict, explaining that the young man accidentally touched him, and he was a newbie. Now the man turned his attention to the one who stood up for our hero. He began to find out who he was. The rest of the players, seeing the altercation between the two men, could not stay away. They saw by the symbol that the first one was from the Griffin Guild. There were 5 guilds. The most powerful was the Griffin Guild. The man who tried to hit the guy disappeared, but promised that if he met him, he would tear him to pieces. The two of them were left alone and watched him leave. Aiden turned to the man and thanked him. He said that it was better to beware of people like the one who had just left. Smiling radiantly, he extended his hand as a sign of acquaintance. His name was Kevin. The hero also introduced himself, which caused a fit of laughter from him. He recognized him as a newcomer. Kevin admitted that there are people who bully only the weak, and if he had not intervened, that man would have continued his bullying. After checking, he invited him to join his guild. Aiden didn't understand, because he was of little use, but the guy convinced him that he had no hidden purpose. After the update stopped, there were few players in the game. Therefore, some players and guilds began to help newcomers so that they would join them. Kevin communicated so easily and naturally, he had already sent Aiden a friend request. Everything was voluntary, he didn't force anyone. Finally, he smiled, turned to the guy, they always welcome newcomers, and left. Aiden stood and watched. He thought that all the players were bad. His memories helped him, but here it turned out to be different. Suddenly, someone jumped on him. It was Ari. She screamed with joy. The guy looked sideways at her. She handed him something yellow in her hands. It was a present from her. The guy was surprised. This was the guy who was bullying the new participant in the game. Ari stayed late to find him. He didn't look very good, beaten and dirty. Leaving it lying in the same place, the couple walked leisurely, talking. The girl was interested in her impressions of this place. While they were walking and talking, someone was watching them from a hillock in a black cloak. His face was not visible. Luke was watching them with his spy eyes. He did not take his eyes off the two. There were 3 creatures in the building. They stood and waited for something. Today there were only 3 of them. A girl with pointy ears and sharp teeth with a ponytail appeared. It was Mia. She was burning with anger. She was calmed down by cameraman Sela. Her snow-white hair fell on her shoulders. Her open face and gold headband made her look quite cute. The third one spoke. He said that Luke had written. The girls turned to him, smiling. The third was Zane. He had horns on his head and a helmet that completely covered his face. His eyes sparkled. He talked about Luke's discovery, about the bug. The girls chirped. They were interested. They all decided to watch what was happening. They opened the tablet where they saw the back of their fourth and the players. They were curious. The players heatedly discussed the news. The check was completed. Nothing was heard about the events, but there was news about the bug being fixed. Our heroes were no exception. They looked at their scoreboard. Ari stood and listened to the news that there was no update and there would not be. The girl stood thoughtfully. She did not understand why the check ended so quickly. Suddenly, something happened to her. She couldn't control herself. She got scared. Her eyes widened. Sweat ran down her cheek. She was under the control of the system. Someone took advantage of her powers. She turned to the guy, put her hand on his shoulder, and he, like her, lit up with a blue aura. Aiden looked at her strangely. Ari quickly jabbered. Now they will come for him and want to remove him, but he should not worry. She will come up with something. Screaming, she began to evaporate. She needed him, so she would try to save him. Aiden covered his face with his hand because the light was coming from Ari, and so he was left alone on the big field. All the players returned to the game, but he remained. Aiden was completely confused. He did not understand what was happening here and what to expect. Ari returned to the previous place where they were taken. The same road, the same forest. She was angry. Blue waves of power came out of her. She crossed all boundaries. A scream came from her. Aiden stood and waited, darkness gathering around him, a crater forming behind him. Luke walked slowly towards him. The guy tried to calm down because he knew that this would happen. The man walked with an army of monsters with horns, confidently walked forward, but the young man decided to fight to the end. Aiden took a frightening pose, clenched fists. His aura turned red. He would fight. And Luke saw an interesting bug. The former non-player character is now a player. A red-clawed paw descended on the young man, who, without fear, watched and waited. Aiden reached into the common storage and pulled out his sharp sword. Now he has something to defend himself with. The red paw grabbed the sword, and the young man stubbornly held on with all his might, gritting his teeth. When the monster fired a laser beam, Aiden dodged it too. His strength was running out. He gathered himself and dealt a crushing blow right to the head, cutting him into two parts. But more than one such monster surrounded him, standing with a sword, clasping it with his hands, ready to fight further. The leg almost fell on Aiden, but the shield helped hold him back, screaming he did not stop. Having unlocked a new ability, the guy forced one of the monsters to fall underground. But then the monster's paw circled Aiden, tying him up, immobilizing him. He watched. He had nothing else to do but watch. The monster swung and pulled the rope. The guy was thrown and hit the wall very hard. The blow was so strong that a scream escaped his throat and a trickle of blood flowed from his mouth. But it wasn't over. He again tore the young man off the wall, shook him, and he flew again. But thanks to unlocking the ability, Aiden was now flying at the monster with his fist forward. He hit it in such a way that it flew past, causing damage to the monster. The monster's hand flew off into pieces from the impact. The blow was so strong that the red creature fell to the ground, and the young man flew away from him. Rising again, he flew towards the other monster, coming face to face with it, preparing to attack each other. Having strengthened his abilities, Aiden could easily destroy magical creatures, and so another monster fell from the young man's fist. After a while, he stood and looked at the work of his hands, clenching his fists and lowering his voice. Luke's voice rang out. He believed that the young man was a high-class bug, since he was able to destroy the keeper of the dungeon, and what he saw was not worth his time, and he went down in vain. Aiden turned around sharply, but the man managed to cover his mouth with his hand so that he could not make a sound. Luke extended his cloaked hand. He spoke quietly and emotionlessly, accusing the guy of being worthless. He admitted that he even had to use a check and the ability to take the operator for a while. Luke's gaze was directed directly. His tired eyes spoke of serious intentions. He needed to remove the bug. Aiden was lifted up. He was being prepared to be removed. Luke held out his hand and looked at it. The guy's widened eyes betrayed his excitement. He was scared. He didn't want such an end. He had his own goal. I remembered that terrible day when the moderator carried out the deletion and compared these two processes and did not understand why this was so. The young man was pierced by red threads. This was not close to the previous removal. Luke knelt down. It was amazing for him that this guy was able to withstand his blow, his ability. The man saw the board. It was glowing red. Two identical abilities collided. It was not possible to remove the guy. He did not have enough authority. Luke looked and couldn't believe his eyes. He didn't have enough authority. He looked dumbfounded. Those three were watching him on the screen. They were no less surprised than the man. This was something new for them. Aiden turned completely red. Those watching had never seen the bug become a strong moderator. Luke lowered his head. He couldn't believe that this guy was stronger than him, the operator. The man wondered who he was. Aiden looked openly but directly, expecting further actions. The young man clenched his hand into a fist. It's dangerous here. Even though he resisted the monsters, he spent a lot of energy. He thought that he could not defeat him. There was no chance. He stood on opposite sides and each thought about his own. But Luke couldn't let Aiden go. He could cause big trouble for the system. The man was not going to give up. He did not want the moderator to know about his failure, so he decided that he would end things with him right now. His trio were watching him. They saw Luke's determination that he would not retreat. Aiden saw what was happening to the man. His mouth opened, and then a battle of survival awaited him. Luke's appearance changed. Now he was not a tired man, but a knight in white armor with a huge sword. This sword began to fall on Aiden, and the knight himself stepped into the attack. The young man was confused. The guy quickly tried to climb into his vault without taking his eyes off the white armor. Luke threw a blow with his sword, cut the ground, and a wave flew towards the guy. Stones flew off in all directions. Aiden put up a defense, clenched his teeth, and his hair fell into his eyes, even screamed. The impact created a deep cut on the ground, dividing the sides into two halves. Aiden was lucky he managed to stop the blow. The knight praised the bent young man. Pointing the sword at the guy, he praised him. He was smart to parry the blow with his thing. Towering over Aiden, Luke demanded an answer. He needed to know where such authority came from. Having blackened his face in any case, removal would have awaited me, and the funnel behind him was already ready. Luke saw how the portal behind the guy's back increased. It was very strange. Aiden gradually disappeared into his portal. He realized that his strength was not enough to defeat the operator. When the young man gets ready, he will find Luke himself. He wanted to stop him, but couldn't. But the funnel was already closing, and the knight was left with nothing. He stood and did not understand how this happened. Luke stood. One eye burned brightly, the other went out. It was impossible to leave here without his permission, so he was discouraged by this trick of Aiden. There was an open chest. It was a common storage room. All the equipment was stored there. The players stood and looked at their scoreboard where all their inventory was. They found errors. The guys shared their news. Things began to disappear due to a bug. The error was never fixed. Suddenly, something happened that frightened the people. A hand came out of the chest, and a scream came from there. Aiden crawled out of the chest, breathing heavily. The players cursed and did not understand how a person could end up there. The young man fell to the floor, listened to the players who cursed the game and needed an update. The trio looked at the blue screen. They waited for Luke to return without moving. They waited. But the White Knight did not want to return. He will pursue the bug because he is deadly, and he will send the data to everyone for study. Mine wanted to leave. She had things to do, but Sela detained her. They need to stick together now. But the girl didn't listen to anyone. She left, walked along the corridor where there were white columns. She didn't want to get involved in this next headache. But behind the next column, a girl with folded hands suddenly stood. She scared Mia. It was Ari. She was interested in the conversation. A large city is located in a picturesque place. Trees envelop the city, bright and large houses. This is the city of Mycenae. People in this city walked slowly. They were not in a hurry to do their business. They communicated with each other. Aiden was hiding in one of the arches of the house. He was trying to write to Ari and was very worried because there was no answer from her. The young man was sure that the operator would follow him wherever he went. Aiden had no choice but to hide. He went inside the corridor, and his cloak moved in waves from his steps. He found himself in a place where there were old boxes, mice, and very strange people. He had been here more than once, but it was difficult to get used to such a place. Aiden remembered that he and Alice were here and ran away together. It was not a very pleasant place. Having dived sharply around the corner, just in time, surveillance was floating along the street. Balls were launched everywhere in order to find him. While the guy stood and thought about whether there was a place where they wouldn't look for him, sparks began to fall. He didn't notice it. When he saw these sparks, he was confused, as if they were leading him along, showing him the way. And Aiden followed the trail, passing by the laundry that hung from above, past houses that were old and from which there was a smell. He reached the end and came to a dead end. When he looked up, he saw a glowing portal. Not seeing anything, I raised my head and was already beginning to think that this was a secret passage. But as soon as she put her hand to the wall to check, it flashed purple and the whole thing began to rattle. Some kind of ornament began to appear on the wall. Aiden stood and looked. It really was a secret passage. The young man was going to pass, especially with the authority of a moderator. He could be anywhere. But still he was scared. He didn't know what was there. A notification appeared in front of Aiden that this zone was outside the system. Appreciating the sarcasm, the young man decided to step there. The young man found himself in the center of the circle. All around was desolation. Fragments of something. Stones. Looking out from the corner, I assessed the situation. There was a long corridor of some kind of brick building, but it didn't look like a dungeon. Just as he wanted to look around, a beaten girl jumped out with a large dish in her hands. Dropping the tray, she screamed and began to run away from the man. Aiden put out his hand to stop her, but did not have time. The hero ran after her, asking her to wait. He wanted to find out about this place. The girl ran out to the tents and the fire, shouting that they had an intruder. The guy ran out and stopped abruptly. He didn't know what it was. A lot of non-player characters, Aiden had time to think, when a weapon appeared in front of his face. But the guy smashed the barrier with his fist. The scattered pieces almost hit him in the face, but he clenched his teeth. It was a girl. She created a barrier for Aiden. After he broke it, she screamed and wanted to know who he was. He took out a sword from the storage. The girl didn't wait for an answer and began to attack. It's impossible for her to try the spell on him. He swung his sword, red light poured out, and the girl jumped back, screaming in pain. If he is a player, then there will be no mercy. She gathered all her strength, her hair beat in waves against her back, and she attacked. Two men came out and began to approach. They could help her. Although she was burning with strength herself, she didn't really need help. All these people who came to help the girl had a weak level. They held sticks and pitchforks for protection. They were all marked as a bug. Aiden was confused. There was some kind of mistake. They were scared. They thought he wanted to delete them. This location was created by Sirius. No one can enter it except the moderator. Sarah was angry. If Aiden entered, then he definitely won't come out alive, the girl repeated without taking her eyes off. Everyone heard a voice from somewhere. He ordered not to touch the guy and bring him to him. Sarah obeyed, but warned that she would not let him out of her sight. The young man followed the girl. There were torches burning on the walls as they walked down a long corridor, and Aiden decided to ask a question. Looking at her back, he was interested in their salvation. how they passed the test and were able to survive. This is very surprising. They would have been removed long ago, but Mr. Sirius saved them all. Sarah remembered her home and what was left after it. They came to some empty area where there was an entrance in the wall. They stood and waited. Aiden was in awe. He would never forget what he saw. He was all collected and looked straight. And he saw a huge dragon with yellow eyes. His scales shimmered blue. He looked at them with one of his eyes. The big dragon bent over them. Aiden couldn't believe his eyes. He stood next to Sarah and didn't breathe. His yellow eyes burned. It was Sirius, the patron spirit, majestic and proud. The guy looked at his panel and thought that the spirit was not a simple non-player character after all. Aiden had only heard legends. These creatures appeared from the very beginning of this world. Hearing a voice that found out that the guy was the new moderator. This question was asked by the dragon. The guy was interested in everything. The dragon was able to see fragments of the young man's memories. The dragon was happy because in a world where everything stopped, such a creature appeared. A new moderator could cure the bug. The girl opened her mouth. She didn't know that the bug could be fixed. Now she was looking at him. That same man, the dragon suddenly changed shape. Everything around lit up and a man walked towards them. It was a young man with yellow eyes. He asked to fulfill Aiden's request. A new quest was added and it was different from the others. It was necessary to save people and fulfill Sirius's request. The girl rushed to the dragon. She was worried about changing her appearance. To begin with, Aiden was ready to listen and only then decide what to do next. People crowded at the gate. They looked inside, craning their heads to get a better look at everything. While the dragon was touching the flowers, the guy wanted to know what kind of request he had. The request was quite simple, to cure and take people to their village. Sirius brought out a ball in his hands in which his people were. He closed his eyes and said that they really needed help. He himself can no longer help, because he showed Aiden his chest. When he saw it, he opened his mouth in surprise. Violet jelly spread out its threads on the chest in the area of the heart, and it was clear from the dragon's face that he was in great pain. Sarah was around the corner. She eavesdropped, and her face changed at the words of her savior. Smiling, she did not agree with him, squeezing her cape tighter and lowering her head. The young people stared at her. Sirius looked with regret, and Aiden with a question. He did not understand what was going on here and wanted to figure it out. The girl ran out from around the corner. She stood and glared at them, then clenched and unclenched her fists. Her eyes were wet from tears. She stood and shouted at Sirius that he had to save himself. Aiden looked and listened. He wanted to help people with all his heart. For helping them, the dragon wanted to give his star. Sarah tried to dissuade him, but he stood his ground. There must be some kind of reward. Aiden decided to fix the bugs, especially since it's not so difficult for him to do it. Having cried out, be it a bug or a system, he will destroy everything that poses a threat and will not spare anyone. The quest was accepted. 2 people stood on a large pedestal, surrounded by all the people. The men stood near Sarah. They were curious whether the guy could handle it. They hoped for him very much. They, the dragon and Aiden, stood in the center of the pentagram. The hero was already covered in a red aura. Looking inside, he saw red threads of people from the system, all of them floating in the void. He chopped and chopped these red threads with his sword. There were many of them, and stopped to look at the work of his hands. There was only one dragon left. He was surrounded by a red aura and purple threads curled around him. The most difficult thing was the dragon. In the middle of his chest, a large spot of emptiness shone, and the purple color completely covered this hole. Aiden went to cut the threads, but something went wrong. If he leaves everything as it is now, it will only get worse. But as soon as he began to remove the stains, these stains spread to him, and he began to peel off these sticky things from himself. Aiden got angry. His eyes turned red. Some worthless bug would attack him. The young man gathered all his strength for the decisive blow and shouted very loudly. All the people saw the red explosion, looked up and thought what was happening there. There were many curious eyes. Opening their mouths, they admired. Sarah turned out to be right. Everything turned out as she said. They did not take their eyes off. The girl saw how Sirius felt bad. He opened his mouth and made incomprehensible sounds, clutching his chest and bent over. Having fallen to the floor, the dragon screamed. His eyes became dark. He held his chest. He was in great pain. His people were worried about him, and Sarah was nearby, supporting him. But when they pulled back the collar of his shirt, they saw that the stain that had been there was disappearing, gradually disappearing. Sirius stood up with Sarah's help. They looked at Aiden. He walked and whistled cheerfully. As he promised, he freed everyone. They looked at him with wide eyes. Now no one can remove them because of a bug. Below, people rejoiced. Some hugged, some raised their fists in the air as a sign of victory. All 50 people became free. The dragon leaned forward. He held his hand to his heart, thanked the young man. He had not even counted on this. Feeling some kind of angry aura on his back, Aiden could not move. A purple figure grew behind him. Sensing danger, the young man slowly began to turn around, and what he saw amazed him. Something with horns and no face was looking at him. In place of the eyes and nose, a luminous hole shone like a spiral. It was a virus, too big. It slowly reached out to the two who stood and looked at it. The dragon delved into his memories. He had already seen in its true form this virus that had harmed him. The virus needed a little time, and it would have infected everything here. The city was gradually filled with purple, its color of power. The dragon could not restrain himself. He began to change. His hand had already turned into a clawed paw, and the purple monster, seeing this, grinned with his crooked smile. The virus was not to blame for anything, and everyone should know about it. Sirius turned black on his face. He did not believe what he heard. But the virus was no longer hunting the dragon. It was interested in another person. Aiden, who heard everything, was confused. Swimming closer to the guy, almost burying her muzzle in his face, she looked at the young man with one eye. He found another target, a more interesting one. With his clawed paw, he climbed into the very middle of the young man. Aiden looked at it with wide eyes, and purple threads began to emerge from the guy's chest, covering him all over. He screamed, but the infection had already begun. The dragon tried to distract the purple creature, because he was his enemy, but the virus did not listen to him. With an explosion, he separated himself into a circle, in which only he and the young man remained. Sirius and Sarah were also hit. Their bodies were enveloped in purple fog, and they screamed. The virus rejoiced. Now it won't have to do boring work like last time. All the people who had just tasted freedom were now infected, especially since they were hidden from the moderator, and this was to the advantage of the virus. The virus liked Aiden's resistance. He savored the taste, watched and chuckled. Sweating like a hail, clenched teeth, face stretched forward, the guy tried to fight the virus, did not want to fall in front of it. The virus was consuming. Things were bad. Abilities could not be opened. They did not function. The purple muzzle leaned towards the young man. Fluttering will not help. You just need to give up, and that's it. The virus completely captured the guy, covered him with its threads, dragged him inside. Despite his efforts, he could not be defeated. Aiden was swallowed up by emptiness. He fell down and down, flew backwards. He did nothing anymore. He flew and fell. Below there was some kind of yellow glow that was expanding its domain. Suddenly, a small hand touched his face. It was so unexpected that Aiden exhaled. A girl's figure appeared out of nowhere next to him. She was glowing yellow, reaching out to him. It was Alice. She smiled a soft smile at him, glowing all yellow. Aiden could not believe that she was here, next to him. The virus stood and watched as light shone through from its threads of power. The slits became more and more. The glow was strong. Aiden appeared. He made his way through the infection. Determination was in his gaze. The horned monster was horrified. The hero has built a new system. Now he is giving commands in relation to the virus. The virus didn't even have time to utter a word before it crumbled into red pieces. Aiden didn't even move towards it. He stood at a distance. The purple monster did not understand who was in front of him, where he got such power that could remove him. The hero did not express any emotions, was serious and collected. He blocked the force that wanted to hit him. People rose from their knees and looked at him. The update has been completed, and this ability he acquired will help protect everyone. The muzzle laughed, sharp teeth flashed. He finally found it. Now he was closer to the moderators. Aiden could not share the fun. While disappearing, the virus managed to say that the hero was exactly the one they had been looking for all this time. The virus disappeared, but promised to make Aiden his own. Upon hearing this, the guy remained standing in his place, puzzled. Sirius turned to him. He was worried about the moderator. Sarah looked over the dragon's shoulder. The dragon was surprised. He didn't know that the guy could use the removal ability. Again, they all found themselves in debt to him. Sirius was grieving. He was powerless, and what a patron spirit he is. Without a system, he is nothing. It was necessary to remove the remains of the virus, they decided. A glow was already emanating from one piece. Maybe a bug will appear. So the dragon gathered all his strength and rushed to these lying around heaps of the virus. But unexpectedly, the purple needles pierced the spirit of the patron. He himself did not expect such an end. A loud scream sobered up. It was Sarah screaming. She raised her hand to her hair. Tears appeared in her eyes. Sirius was floating, already completely pierced. The girl called him, and Aiden rushed to the rescue. The virus did not warn about its ability to multiply and clone. It grinned caustically at them. Aiden grabbed a sword from the common storage. He was in a hurry and did everything abruptly, thoughtlessly. Sirius fell to the ground. After the guy cut off the threads of the virus, blood was flowing from the corner of his mouth. The girl ran up to him. Squinting his eyes, Aiden looked at the dragon. He was motionless. Sarah begged him to open his eyes. The character didn't understand why the virus was still there. He removed it, he gritted his teeth and was angry. One-eyed faces mocked the guy and deleted them more than once, and only a moderator can do this. The angry Aiden showed his ability. He directed all his efforts to destroy the virus. The clones were removed one by one. The virus laughed. The guy had enough authority to use the ability. Even though he beat them, they were reborn again. The guy had little strength, little ability. The guy didn't have enough of everything. They covered themselves with a shield. Taken from the storage, from the attacks of the virus, house was going on around them. The virus was creeping up. The young man could not stay on his feet and fell down, and then the threads crawled towards him. Aiden fought back as best he could, but then he glances at the sword and sees that the virus has captured him too. It crumbled before his eyes. He realized that the player's weapons only affect magical creatures. There is no point in sharpening them, so these evil spirits must be removed differently. The virus was playing with the person. A lot of weapons were lying around that were corrupted by the virus, but Aiden did not give up. The virus was strange. No ability could take it, no deletion, no attack. It continued to clone. The virus engulfed him entirely. The firewall got on his nerves. It twisted the young man into a spiral. He could not move. In this spiral, he tried the removal ability again, and it lit up all white and red. But it was all useless. Darkness rolled in again. But the young man did not want to give up. Aiden cannot keep up with the virus. He orders him to close his eyes and give up. The virus has covered him. Only his eyes remain visible. While the virus and the guy were fighting, Sirius came to his senses and tried to get up, leaning on the girl's hand. He was all beaten up. Blood was flowing from abrasions and wounds. Sarah will try to heal him with her magic. You just need to hold out. But such a disease could not be cured. The girl began to sob. Tears rolled down her cheeks. The dragon drove her away. Soon it could become a virus and cause harm. Clinging to Sirius, she cried and screamed. They just found a way to escape. Why did this happen? The dragon began to glow. He asked for forgiveness, and the new moderator needs help. Aiden is completely mired in the virus, and it is becoming increasingly difficult to resist it. He thought, even the most insignificant thing would help him now. He stuck his head out and looked. He took out the only thing that had always been with him, his sledgehammer, and looked at it with a strange look. Alice's hammer, it didn't collapse like everything else. It was intact. He grabbed it tighter with one hand. Aiden swung the hammer. It lit up. The guy gave the command to delete, and it worked. He rushed at the virus with a hammer in his hands, flew to strike. The light illuminated everything around. The virus tried to crawl away from the bright flash. It did not expect such an attack. It was impossible. Aiden, with his mouth open, looked at the hammer in his hand. The weapon of submission can only be wielded by those who have received permission from the moderator. Gritted teeth, straight gaze, a drop of sweat on his cheek. This is what the guy looked like trying to stop the virus. Suddenly, an object floated in front of him, hanging in the air and blue in color. It was the star of Sirius. The stone shone blue, shimmered yellow. It was a reward for the quest. Aiden looked back at the dragon and the girl. Sarah extended her hand to him. The dragon was already dead. Turning around, the guy raised the hammer angrily. His eyes darkened. His teeth clenched so hard that you could hear them crunching. The attack was strong. The virus was scared. It gradually disappeared. The young man had an unusual weapon in his hands. The virus had seen it for the first time, a fiery sword. With this sword, he finally destroyed the monster. He could no longer recover and clone himself. The young man with glowing red eyes took the sword with both hands and thrust his punitive sword to the end. The virus has risen up. The games are over. He is serious. The guy is ready to answer him. Aiden humbly did not want to accept his fate. He is ready to fight to the end. There was a blow, which caused a wave to roll, breaking the ground. The guy's cloak fluttered, but he stood firmly on his feet. With his fiery sword, he ran, delivering a decisive blow. His eyes were dark. He gave the command. The blow was so powerful that the ground rose from above. Spruce and pine trees jumped out. Stones flew in different directions. Aiden exhaled. He finished. He sat down on his knees. The battle was difficult. Stones were falling around him. By placing his hammer on the ground, but still touching his palm, it was all thanks to him that he was able to win. He only looked at his victory as a shadow. What happened after the victory over the virus? Someone was looking at the purple screen in a purple image and did not understand what happened to one of its copies. It could have been removed either by the operator or by a high-ranking defender. He poked his clawed finger into the middle. Seeing Aiden, he admitted that it was an interesting specimen and became curious. The man with the burning circle in his chest chuckled. He might even hit the moderator. Suddenly, there was an explosion. Fire poured out to the sides. The explosion was strong. Stones and grass flew in different directions. The fire also touched the young man, Worm, but he only grinned at it. A girl with ears came out of this fire. It was Mia. She was angry because she had finally found the worm. Her eyes sparkled. Her mouth with sharp teeth was open. She looked for him for a long time. She hid well. The figure of the girl stood in the fire. There was disaster around her. The fire bent the trees. Sparks swirled. A ball was forming in her hand. The ball was endowed with power. Her hand was pulsating and burning. Mia gained strength and rushed at the man. She would be enough for him alone. The worm flew up into the air. The girl could only look at him. The purple shadow did not fall. A man attacked. The girl found herself in purple threads. The virus absorbed her. She screamed and jerked her hand. He raised his clawed paw up. The smile did not leave his face. He could handle it. She needed to call someone with her. After the explosion, the dust stood in a cloud. The worm descended. A black aura surrounded it. The explosion forced him to retreat. A white column of smoke and pieces of stones flew to the sides. This blow was dealt by Mia. The radiance and her strength were concentrated on her hands. There was no need to underestimate her. At this time, people crowded around Sirius in the square. Aiden was also here. He looked at the dragon and turned black. The virus gradually consumed him. From his chest, it moved to his eye, shining with its violet glow. The dragon was shackled with a blue chain. He could not open his jaw. His eye burned on his face, and his claws scratched the ground, leaving deep furrows. Towering above him was the moderator, all dressed in black with one eye glowing. The dragon was trying to get out. He didn't understand why innocent people had to be removed. After all, the moderator was supposed to protect people, but on the contrary, he got rid of the infected. People screamed. They were scared, but there was no protection. Standing opposite each other, the moderator and the dragon looked straight. The dragon accused and reprimanded him that he should have been a support. The man in black hovered above Sirius. The non-player characters who oppose the system, and he, the dragon, pose a hidden threat. Putting his hand forward as a bright blue color poured out, he decided to block them. The dragon struggled, tried to get out, screamed, but the blocks had already been placed and there was no way out of them. Blocks grew in the middle of the clearing. It was a blockade. No entrance, no exit. The pillars went high into the clouds. Time passed. The city grew on the site of the clearing, but the blocks remained, with a staircase leading to them. The dragon, chained in chains, dozed calmly. No one disturbed his sleep. His paws folded under his head. His radiance became weaker. Suddenly, the dragon felt that someone was touching him. It was the hand of a girl in a torn shirt. Looking, he saw a girl looking at him with wide, sad eyes, wearing dirty, torn clothes. Before this girl, they didn't touch the dragon. They looked at it, talked about it, but no one came close. The girl was constantly with Sirius. She had no family, and she spent whole days with him. The dragon gave her a name, Sarah. She obeyed him, became closer to anyone. But the girl was growing up, and she needed people, although he was also used to her, but he had to let go. He taught her everything he could. She had the ability for magic. They expanded her abilities. Sirius shared his power with her for better results for self-defense, since she had a natural talent for magic. Sarah quickly found a common language with people. The dragon was afraid that she would avoid them, but the smiling girl found herself in the center of attention. The dragon had nothing, no strength, no previous appearance, no purpose. He sadly looked into the portal where the girl was. But what happened was that Sirius met the virus again, and the chains were still put on him. The dragon broke the chains. He must save everyone from this terrible virus at all costs. Standing on a hillock and looking down at the residents who were gradually enveloped by the virus, penetrating inside people who did not notice it. Sirius was overtaken by the virus, preventing him from teleporting. He wanted to protect these people. But luck was on the side of the virus. It left, evaporated, and the dragon had no choice but to watch its wake. But he left him a gift for last. In the center of his chest, there was a purple spot that was spreading deeper and deeper. Sirius watched as the virus disappeared, leaving only a dot in the sky and a spot on his chest. The check has begun. The operator and monsters have descended. Errors and a bug have been found. They must be gotten rid of. The territory will be deleted. Sirius looked at the city. Everything was repeating itself again. He embraced the houses with a blue glow. The dragon gathered everyone together. He would not allow them to be removed. Not this time. He used teleportation. The dragon's memories led us to a little dragon. Someone reached out and named him Sirius. The man said that Sirius is now a light for those who have gone astray, the brightest star. The man looked at the big board. What changes had happened? What was happening now? Everything was under control. The moderator, and it was he, looked at the inscription Sirius and remembered the dragon. He put his hand to the name. Aiden looked around him. He was impressed. This ability is very good. The guy looked over his shoulder at Sarah. She thanked him. They were able to get out. Aiden will lead the people to his village of Urki. It is not far away and they will reach it quickly. But the guy was stopped by the girl. She bowed her head. Aiden looked at her, asking what she wanted. She thanked him for removing Sirius. He would not have wanted to become a virus. Aiden raised his hand and removed the dragon forever. The girl spoke too emotionally. She blushed. There were tears in her eyes. They will follow the guy wherever he says. They walked a straight road, ahead of Aiden and Sarah. Behind them, 50 people. All of them became residents of the village of Urch. The young man wanted to know about the star. The girl looked at him, but she couldn't say anything, because she didn't know anything herself. The dragon greatly cherished and protected the star. It was the source of his power. There are other similar stars, but it is not known where. Aiden looked at the hammer. His moderator level had increased because of the star, and if it had not been him who had absorbed it, it would have been terrible. They approached the destroyed walls. Sarah screamed. It was the village of the young man. The village was destroyed. It needed repairs, and there were only 5 inhabitants, Aiden explained. Aiden was greeted by his residents, smiling happily as they waited for his return. The young man was surprised that they were waiting for him here today. But then a woman's hands covered his shoulders, and a voice was heard. Ari jumped onto his back. She smiled, narrowing her eyes, but the guy looked back and was surprised by her appearance. Standing in the distance, they talked. The girl folded her arms on her chest, her favorite pose. She wondered where he had brought so many people from. Sarah was frightened by Ari's strength. It was like Sirius's, but even more powerful. She was curious who she was and where she came from. Aiden wanted to know where the girl was. He couldn't contact her, but she didn't answer. Soon, everyone would find out. Suddenly, behind the guy, something fell heavily, so that smoke came from that place. Aiden turned to look. There was only smoke. People started shouting. Someone fell from the sky, maybe even a player. It was the cameraman, Mia, who fell. She was covered in scratches and looked a little exhausted. As Aiden approached Mia, people whispered in fear. But they were no longer bugs, so there was no reason to be afraid. Mia became huge. She towered over the young man. He had to raise his head. Thoughts were racing in the guy's head. Another cameraman. Reaching his hand into his bosom, Aiden touched the handle of the hammer. If anything, he could use it again. But a strange reaction from the girl followed. She pursed her ears. There were tears in her eyes, and she apologized for missing someone. Screaming, she ran past Aiden, who was stunned that he could not utter a word. Mia ran, fell into Ari's arms and cried. But she was not angry with her. She did a good job. From what he saw, Aiden's eyes became round. He watched the girls. His girlfriend decided to clarify everything. She introduced Mia. You can trust her. She won't let you down. Aiden couldn't come to his senses. Ari was sitting in a chair. She rested her cheek on her fist and was in the clouds as other people argued around her. They sat at the table. Aiden clenched his fists. He was angry. Mia stood aloof. They were deciding important matters. The young man was indignant that Ari brought the cameraman here because she could remove all of them. In order to save this world, we need to remove all the bugs, Mia said calmly, even lazily. Aiden was angry, clenched his teeth. Why should they be removed? Some other way out is needed. Unable to contain his emotions, the man hit the table with his fist. He can fix the bug. Mia didn't believe it. She screamed impossible. Ari tried to calm these two down. Ari invited Aiden to become a moderator as expected. He turned sharply to her. The guy's frightened look, sweat dripping down his cheek, becoming a moderator was powerful. What's wrong with Ari? Why is she offering this? The young man thought. First, she brought the cameraman here. Now she's asking him to become a moderator. The girl's goal was to replace the current moderator, and this is only possible if the young man helps. The two of them had one goal. This goal was the moderator, because the young man also wanted to take revenge on him. Ari looked at Aiden. She needed him. She couldn't cope without him. The guy looked at her half a turn. There were too many questions, but he understood that she wouldn't answer now. She wasn't ready. Ari said that the authority of a moderator does not make him a moderator. He still needs to create content. Mia leaned forward. She screamed, turning to the girl. She didn't want the guy to become a moderator. It would be better for her to be him. Ari put her hand on the girl's head and laughed herself, putting her hand under her cheek. A man came up, leaned towards Aiden and said something in his ear. The guy listened attentively. An order was given to feed the newly arrived people, but they ate so much that there might not be enough provisions. As soon as Mia heard this, her gaze cleared. She remembered all the attacks on the operators because of the storage facility. And when she saw how Aiden easily threw his hand into the common storage and tried to get provisions, her face changed. She lowered her head down. The unsuspecting guy handed the bag to the guard. Mia's face changed. Anger seized her. She clenched her teeth. heard the word freebie and could not restrain herself. She bit Aiden on the hand. He screamed, and she held her sharp teeth on his hand for a long time. On a quiet moonlit night, two people stood on a hillock. People below made a fire, walked imposingly and calmly. Aiden winced from the scratches and wounds left by Mia. It hurt him. Ari laughed and held the now empty bottle of healing potion over the young man. The young man was very angry with Mia, and Ari got it too because she dragged her to them. She was dating Mia, so Aiden couldn't contact her. She arranged for help from the girl with the horns. The guy remained sitting on the grass. Ari moved a little further, stood in her favorite position. He wanted to know what was next, but it was a secret. The girl's face changed when she found out that Aiden had met with the virus. She looked at him in fear. She turned sharply to the guy, clarified whether he knew about them, and when he said yes, the reaction was not long in coming. Sweat ran down her face. She frightenedly tried to open Aiden's shirt, groping her chest with her hands. Placing his hands, the guy shouted what she was doing, but Ari calmed down. There were no signs of infection. Shouting at the girl, Aiden grabbed her hands and removed her from his chest. He asked her to calm down. She raised a frightened look at him. In response, she began to shout at him that he should run away if he encountered the virus again, that it was very dangerous for him. The virus is very dangerous. The worm stands at the head of all purple creatures, grinning. Great power is hidden in it. Ari pulled back. She didn't believe what she heard. How could he remove the virus? She looked at him with her mouth open. She moved away from Aiden. She was curious how he coped, but they helped him, and the help was good. Ari stared ahead. Removing the virus is not an easy task. If there was no help, then there would be a different end. Standing in front of each other, eye to eye, one question was asked. Non-player characters were removed due to the virus. People died because of the virus. If you don't react immediately, the system dies. The virus spreads too quickly. Having firmly decided to become a moderator, Aiden was confident in his choice. He was ready to take risks for the sake of the people. Opening her mouth slightly, Ari exhaled barely audibly. Their looks were similar. Aiden has a thumbs up. She will tell him something since he agrees to become a moderator. It is very difficult for one person to manage such a large source of information. He needs proven operators. Ari joined the young man. She took him by the face, smiled, and asked him to choose her as an assistant. A large table, columns, there were chairs around the table. There is a conversation going on, people sitting there and solving questions. An urgent meeting of operators had been announced, so now everyone sat at the table and listened to the reason for the meeting. Mia gathered everyone. Someone was sitting next to her. He put his feet in boots on the table. The girl didn't like it. The guy with green hair smiled and turned to the girl. He wanted to quickly finish with all this. The girl sitting next to her was also bored. Mia got angry. She flushed. Her eyes became empty. She intimidated Dyke, a guy with green hair. She sat at the table at the head, with her hands on the floor. She found the true body of the worm, and this is very important information for everyone. There were two of them. They were as if in a fog. They came out gradually. A huge force was approaching. The shadows of those people who were at the table lined up. They looked at the new arrivals. The first was the patron spirit, Proscia. She was a girl with white hair, yellow eyes, in a beautiful white dress. She gave way to the great moderator. He was in a black suit with his face covered with a mask, his head tilted down. The moderator came personally. Everyone was whispering, standing below and waiting for what would happen next. Mia was amazed. The question of the moderator's arrival also tormented her, but she thought that perhaps he had read her report. At this time, two people stood in a clearing under a tree. These two were close to each other and trusted each other as if they were themselves. A red light appeared in front of Aiden. Whether he wanted to approve Ari as the first operator, he was still thinking. The memories of his memory took him to Ari. Here she is helping him. Here she is smiling. She is always next to him. There is no better candidate for this place. She is very strong, and Aiden was going to press the choice. As soon as the guy clicked yes, Ari became all light. She glowed so much that he had to cover his face with his hand. The girl looked at herself. She changed her appearance. Now her hair was multicolored, and her clothes were red. Ari clenched her fist and made some sound. Aiden was confused. He didn't understand what was wrong with her. She rushed to him, hugging him, tears flowing from her eyes. She was grateful to the guy. The young man became curious about her level, because she has so much strength, and now he could barely tear her away from him. As soon as the guy thought about the level, the system produced a scoreboard. As a moderator, he can see its strength. He looked at Ari sadly. His request was blocked by another moderator. His authority was not enough. Aiden looked at the girl. He was interested in what she was doing. If the level was being hidden like that, she was wiping away tears of happiness. People slowly restored the village, erected walls of houses, and removed garbage. Some men approached the guy. They want to go for resources. Due to the fact that there are more magical creatures, hunting has become problematic. Perhaps it's because of the dungeon nearby you need to go explore. It will be difficult for him alone, so he takes a magician with him. This magician was Sarah. But Aiden started talking about what he could easily take from the vault and was about to put his hand in there. But he remembered Mia and her bite on the arm, so the vault slammed shut and the guy clenched his fist. Ari quietly approached him, having learned that they wanted to go to the dungeon, but Aiden clarified that it was not him, but them. The girl pounced on him, his shoulders under her fingers. She sent the young man to the dungeon. People were heading into the cave. The gate was bright red. There was no way to get lost. Aiden walked forward decisively. He had already been in the dungeon once and fought with magical creatures. Repeating it should not be more difficult. But Ari slowed him down. The guy looked back at her. He didn't understand anything about the caves in her opinion. There are several types of magical creatures, and no one knows which one will be this time. Pointing her finger at Aiden, the girl forbade the use of the moderator's abilities. She talked and said, in the future he will have to visit caves more than once, so he must realize and feel it himself. After finishing her speech, Ari turned again. All three of them looked at her. They are no longer non-player characters, so they need to level up. Standing back to back, the characters fought with monsters, some repelling attacks with magic, others with a sword and bow. Aiden shouted and gave the order to leave. The rest of his team obeyed. Tired, they leaned on the wall of the cave, resting a little. Sarah sat down on the stone floor. They were weakened. Ari gave good advice, if not for her, because they were already falling into a trap. Sharp stakes were sticking out from below. There was also an ambush, where they huddled in a circle and fought monsters, using all their strength and skills. And not susceptible to magical attacks, everything was useless. There were such creatures. Ari's appearance caused great delight, especially since she brought some monsters. But smiling, the girl with one blow made the monsters crumble. Only their mouths managed to open, but did not utter a sound. The trio stood with their mouths open and looked at the girl's ability to exterminate monsters. Looking at the levels of these three, she was glad that their levels were getting higher. Aiden looked at Jack. He was glad that now he could feel his strength. It flowed through his body. They have now begun to understand players who are chasing a higher level. The young man closed his eyes, raised his hand to his mouth. He became embarrassed. Ari praised him so much. They approached a door that was different from the other doors. A skull with horns stuck out from above. They all felt uneasy. They felt the energy, strong, heavy. They doubted their abilities. Ari pushed. She pointed to the door. If she wanted to go there, she found it funny, but the hero didn't. He barely made it here anyway. A sudden question from Jack made him wonder what would happen if they died, since they were no longer non-player characters. Ari reassured them all, saying that they would have a firewall. It would provide protection to people. A firewall is a shield with which the system protects characters, an obstacle to external attacks. Ari took a pose, hands on her chest. She stopped talking and demanded that they all go forward, just to check the defense. There is nowhere to retreat. In Aiden's eyes, there is confidence. They need to become stronger. The village was being built. People began to feel at ease and calm. But suddenly, something fell, destroying the newly built building, and the peace of people came to an end. But it turned out to be Aiden and his people. Having fallen, they began to rub their bruised places. Rising up, they themselves did not understand what had happened, but they remained alive, and that was pleasing. At first, everything went according to plan. They met a magical creature that towered over them. Attack after attack came, but then they all died from the macro attack that was inflicted by this creature. Ari ran up. She told them, as she ran, that it was the boss. They didn't understand who it was and what to do. The boss is the main creature, which is quite difficult to defeat. Aiden listened very carefully. He needs to find a weak point. Otherwise, he will die and die. Gritting his teeth, holding back the attack with his shield, the young man wanted to know what the score was for them already here. They stood again in front of the creature, pointed their weapons, and thought about what they should do, how to win. When it swung its next attack at them, the heroes decided to attack with everything they could and rushed forward. But neither the arrows, nor the sword, nor the magic, nothing worked. The boss remained almost untouched. But Aiden noticed something he hadn't noticed before. This is it, he thought. He attacked this object. The creature rose up, expecting an attack, and the guy attacked with his sword. And he succeeded. The monster screamed, squealed, opened its mouth, and began to glow with a bright light. Aiden gave the chance to attack the magical creature. The two stood and watched, but heard the order. They moved towards the creature. The young man exhaled. They were able to clear the dungeon shaft. They were victorious. The trio rejoiced, hugged each other, thanked each other too. They won. They saw the reward begin to appear. The chest fell down and now sparkled, waiting to be opened. Having opened the chest, they were delighted. There was gold and stones there. The men opened their mouths, and Sarah cupped her cheeks. Aiden was content, scratched but still content. He could no longer rely on the vault. Looking at his people, the guy thought that now they would be able to feed themselves. Ari begged the young man to go somewhere with her. Her open face, how could such a creature be refused? Aiden and Ari walked along a long corridor past the columns. The girl walked ahead. The guy did not lag behind her. Lost in his thoughts, the guy did not hear the girl's call and woke up when he was standing in front of the sparkling door. She was absent last time because of the dungeon keeper, and then the young man saw a red, bent monster. They do not allow magical creatures to scatter into the outside world. Aiden remembered how he killed one of them, sat near the parts, and exhaled from fatigue. If you remove one of them, then nothing will happen. They will simply replace him with another. Ari raised her hand to her mouth. The girl offered to make the keeper her own. As a moderator, he needs to do this. But, Ari continued, you shouldn't poach too much at once, otherwise the operators will notice. Aiden needs to try. He reached out his hand to the keeper and wanted to touch him. Light spread from the place the guy touched. The girl stood and watched the process. The moderator changed, lowering his hand. The young man simply stood and looked at the giant, who began to awaken. The dungeon keeper knelt down and lowered his head as a sign of respect and acceptance of the new moderator. A good start. Now this entire territory belongs to Aiden. Ari was happy for him. The young man turned around and walked away. The girl wanted to know where he was going, but he needed more cameramen. The guy's words made Ari freeze in place. He needed to entrust this place to a person he can trust. And this, unfortunately, is not Ari. She didn't understand why Aiden was reacting this way. She caught up with him, trying to find out what was wrong. Ari began to talk about trust with a sharp movement of her hand. The guy covered her mouth with his hand, silencing her. She will accept any of his decisions, no matter what it is. The young man turned to her. The point was not at all that he needed her next to him. The girl's eyes widened. He needs to expand his moderating powers. Aiden was serious. He remembered the Star of Sirius. Ari laughed when she heard that she was named the first operator, without even looking at whether she had secrets. Jumping, they began to leave the cave. She will make him a true moderator. The young man was sitting on a chair. He leaned his hand on the table, waving his arms. Two people stood in front of him. They were afraid that they would not be able to cope with such responsibility. Jack and Sarah screamed at the same time. They were dumbfounded by Aiden's offer to become his cameraman. But everything was for a reason. The guy thought through everything. The residents follow the two of them, and they are a good candidate for this role. Ari ran up to Aiden, hugged him by the shoulders. She agreed with him. These two need to try. The young man relied on them if necessary. He would help and support. Everyone would make an effort. A man with long white hair stood with his arms outstretched in front of a purple canvas. Continuing to stand in the same position, purple shadows gradually crawled out from all sides. They appeared everywhere, stood, sat, suddenly. They gathered here today for an obvious reason. Everyone knows what is happening, the man said. It's all because of the moderator. He acts personally, and soon he will overtake all of them, take on them. All copies of it are removed very quickly, but those that remain are enough to collect information. The man warned his assembled subjects to sit quietly and keep their heads down. It was the worm, he remembered Aiden, whom he assessed as an interesting specimen. Aiden and Ari said goodbye to the villagers. They left, but entrusted the people into the hands of Jack and Sarah. Ari taught them well. They kept up with the pace. Sarah read educational books under supervision. Jack also completed the training. The girl pursed her lips and he got it, but now the village will be in good hands. Plus, she developed a project. Now the village will be hidden from view and will be difficult to find. The preparations were completed. The guy thanked the operator. This is exactly what he wanted. The board lit up yellow. The training was completed. Now Aiden is a moderator. Everything is for real. The young man headed into the open portal. Now he felt different. He needed to change the system. Again, they walked along the road. Again, there were mills in the distance. The two of them walked along the road and thought where they should start. But suddenly Aiden received a voice message. Ari was very surprised by this and screamed. The guy started listening. The girl got angry. She could barely restrain herself from commenting. It was Kevin. He was wondering if Aiden could talk and if he was distracting him. He suggested that the guy help the newcomers. They were just about to provide assistance. Aiden thought about it, took his chin with 2 fingers. This would not be a bad chance, especially since the reward would be good. Having agreed and ended the conversation, he turned to Ari, but she yelled at him, was angry, and did not understand why he should get involved in this. Daunt was located among hilly forests. The town was beautiful, large buildings and a lot of different people. Aiden opened the door and walked decisively inside, not an iota of doubt on his face. All the players were there, making his way past them. He saw the hand of the caller. He waved it, calling to him. Kevin jumped up from his seat, holding out his hand, and those at the table remained sitting in place and looking at those approaching. Having met his gaze, the guy laughed, as promised. Aiden quickly rushed over. When Kevin saw Ari, he was speechless, blushed, opened his mouth, and was delighted. Taking Aiden aside, he warmly whispered questions in his ear. He was interested in the girl and who they were related to each other. At this time, the girl was thinking about who Kevin was and did not notice how he extended his hand. Embarrassed, the guy scratched his head with his hand and offered to befriend the girl. But the girl turned away. She didn't want to, and the guy wasn't interested in him. He laughed. He'll get his way. Leading to the table, Kevin introduced the players they would be fighting with today. The guy gathered all the members around him and began to tell what they would do today. They will fight the boss of the field and give a good reward, especially since it is also suitable for beginners. Kevin ordered not to be afraid. If anything happens, he clenched his fist and raised it in confidence of victory. It was a troll canyon. The required level was 49 for its passage. A crowd had gathered at the entrance. Aiden sat on a rock and listened to what Kevin was telling the others, who said that they shouldn't count on help. Some shadows approached them, saying that this giant was theirs, the guy swore. It was another team. They were interested in who they were. There were several of them. A skirmish began. They were figuring out who would fight the giant. The head of the team interrupted the newcomers. Grabbing the newcomer by the throat, the head growled at him and swore. It was unpleasant and scary for the new participant. The rest of the team began to push the newcomers, ordering them to get out of here. When they hit Aiden, when they touched him, his face changed, his gaze became scary. And then he struck the guy's ear with his fist. Without further ado, he did not expect the blow, and tears flowed from his eyes. The two team captains looked back at the scream and froze with their mouths open. Shaking himself off where his boyfriend touched him, Aiden muttered that he shouldn't let his paws loose. He appealed to everyone that whoever came first is good. This must be understood by all mediocrities. The newcomers could not leave this situation so easily. The commander sent them to solve this problem, and they moved in a crowd towards the guy. Deftly, playfully, Aiden dealt with the players, threw them over himself, and struck. He didn't even touch someone with his hands. He kicked someone in the stomach and forced them to let out the air. Very good, the captain praised the guy, but he rolled up his sleeves and walked towards him. He had a high level. Aiden saw the tattoo, remembered the guilds. He was next in line to become the head of the Hydra Guild. But Kevin's sword blocked his way. He will no longer stay on the sidelines. But then Aiden put his hand on his shoulder, slowing him down, stopping him. The guy would decide for himself. The young man will decide for himself, because he is a show-off and it will be easy to handle. He grinned. A guy with a fist was rushing towards Aiden. The attacker grinned, thought that the guy was blown away, and that he could only scratch with his tongue. Aiden waited and waited for him to say another word. The attacker believed that they had already shown their power over this place. The retaliatory strike was not long in coming. Our hero swung and hit the captain with a backhand. The blow was so strong and powerful that his face was slammed back into place. Even the guy was surprised by his strength. Aiden's blow caused such damage that the player had to move to the spawn location, while the rest of the participants watched and did not believe what was happening. Kevin and the hero looked after the fleeing players. They decided not to contact them. The guy was amazed at the young man's abilities. A lot had changed since the last meeting. He thought about Aiden. The newcomers were delighted. They smiled and considered him the best of the best. Compliments poured in non-stop. Kevin turned to the guy, started talking about karma, that now his karma would decrease, but this did not frighten our hero. The captain of the escaped people stood and clenched and unclenched his hand. He was angry and could not calm down. He was overcome by some low-level rat. He was destroying everything around him. He was angry that he was now running around there calmly, and he was humiliated. Ari watched this case from the roof. She was not hiding, but no one saw her. Aiden jumped up and slashed the boss of the fields with his sword, while the newcomers watched him from cover. He killed him, people rejoiced, their level increased, they rejoiced, and the guy just stood and looked at it all. They wanted to add him as a friend, but the young man's thoughts were far from here, putting his fist under his chin. He believed that he was faster with tactics. Scratched, Aiden turned to Kevin. He heard praise about how well he was doing for a newbie. He didn't give up trying and called him back to his guild. The guys from Hydra wouldn't leave him just like that, and Kevin would be able to protect him. Aiden had a choice to accept or refuse. The advantages were great, but the guy hesitated. But he wanted to consult with Ari, but could not find her. She had disappeared somewhere. Somewhere on the mountain there was a guild castle. This place was guarded very well. The head sat on the throne. He listened to the guy who lost to Aiden and was angry that someone touched a member of his guild. The injured guy was allowed to take the guys with him. The order was given to trample the offender into the dirt. Bowing, he understood. There was a fuss, some screams. The door opened, and Ari appeared on the threshold with a young man by the throat. She dragged him with her. The guys turned their heads towards her. The guys were lying near the door. Some were unconscious. Some were clutching their throats. The girl's boot was pointed to the side. She was about to walk. The guys who were talking began to swear. They could not cope with the girl. They were useless idiots. Ari was surrounded by a ring. They were given the order to take her. She looked at everyone, turning around. The man looked at her and grinned. There was no need to come to them alone, even though she was not made with a finger. Two men approached Ari. One stuck out his tongue and held a knife. The second gritted his teeth and also had a weapon. The girl stood in the center, but they all heard a voice that told them not to kill. They needed to find out about her guild. The silent girl dealt one blow and took out all the enemies, leaving only smoke. The head and his subordinate were shocked by what they saw and screamed, because their players were level 100. The man became furious. He was very angry. He stuck his hand into the storage room, looking for something there. He pulled out his sword and already raised it over the girl. He was so angry that he did not realize his actions. The girl stood calmly and waited. A man stood in front of a stack of books. He could not concentrate because of the noise from above, and debris was falling on him from the ceiling. The man wanted to know what was happening above. His assistant had already come to report. He put the book on the shelf. They were attacked. He didn't like it. He wanted to know how many of them were there. But the man hesitated and could not answer the question the first time. As soon as I heard the answer, about one person, I turned around sharply and asked to repeat it. A man walked quickly along the corridor after the assistant. He was walking to see what kind of girl it was. He opened the door, walked in, froze, clenched his hands into fists. What he saw was spectacular. Ari stood without a single mark and held the head by the throat, who was kneeling with his head thrown back. The one who entered grinned. There was a girl alone, and they could not defeat her. Stones, dust, all this flew to the sides. The guys covered their faces with their hands so that nothing would get into them. That guy from the library was the person in charge of the guild, Mr. Avend. All the people in the room hoped that now the master would show her a place. Ari also turned and looked at him. But the blow he struck did not hurt her. He looked at her sadly, thinking that she was also a high-level player. The player decided to fight with full strength. Warned that if you don't want to leave, then die, strength was forming in his hands. The guys from the team ran out the open door, since the force could have affected them too. The man continued to concentrate the power in his hands, then he launched a beam towards the girl. Avand opened his hands, released the power, stones fell around him, and he stood smiling. But Ari stood, and again there was not a single scratch on her. Everything flew around her too. Then he doubled his strength, hit the ground angrily, sending an attack towards the girl, which she could not accept. But Ari survived. She only watched his attempts to attack her. Seeing the whole standing girl, he cried out, how could he not hit? Because he hit with his absolute skill. The guy lowered his head. Ari mocked him. She understood him. He is the strongest here. Before he could blink, the girl's hand covered his mouth. His eyes widened. It was humiliating. Ari spoke, continuing to hold him the same way. She came to them because they allowed themselves too much. She began to warn that if they didn't leave her, she wouldn't leave anything behind. The man opened his mouth and screamed shrilly. The girl dragged him in this position, breaking through the walls, her hair snaked behind her. The once solid, good house. Now the ball is buried under ruins, and the guild flag is toppled from above. A hand stuck out from under the rubble. She threw stones around her and called for help. A man emerged from under the rubble. He was tired of dying. His level had dropped. This upset him very much because he had tried so hard to improve. Gritting his teeth, blood flowing down his lips, his eyes burning with anger. He will not forgive for his shame. At this time, two men were talking. One was worried about the other and asked him to still consider the proposal to join the guild. Aiden looked at Kevin, smiling. He'll take care of himself. It's not worth worrying about. The man said goodbye to him. It was time for him. Let him take care of himself. He waved his hand, Aiden answered. When everyone said goodbye to each other, Ari called out to the guy. He turned and stared at her. The young man wanted to know where she was, but he already knew the answer to his question, because they would sharpen their grudge against him, so she figured it out. The guy turned completely to her. The Hydra Guild was nearby, so Ari looked there. Out of the corner of his ear, Aiden caught the two guys talking about the guild. He heard that it was under ruins. Ari laughed. Now they won't care about you. Don't worry about some kind of Hydra. Closing his eyes, he exhaled and smiled. This is in the girl's style. He was pleased with her care. Aiden stuck his hand into the storage room and tried to find something there. The wait wasn't too long. He handed her something in his fist. Ari looked attentively. He wanted to give it to her even earlier, but it didn't work out. This was Aiden's first time making something with his own hands, so the product was not ready yet. There was a pendant lying on his open palm. Ari was surprised. She accepted the gift, but did not put it away yet, and the guy said that there was a location function. The girl looked at him with all her eyes. He asked her not to disappear again without warning. She pressed the pendant to her chest. Ari thanked the guy. She would wear it carefully and keep it. She was pleased. She closed her eyes. The operators came out of the open door. They exhaled. The meeting was finally over. Mia was slowed down by one of them. She was in a hurry, but still turned to him, waiting for what he would tell her. She heard that he had found the worm's body. She immediately sank, but she could not defeat him. Especially difficult for one operator. Mia turned away from him and got ready to leave. She still had things to do, a lot, a carriage and a whole cart. But the extreme words made her turn around. She did not report the find to the moderator. The operator began to suspect her. She had become close to someone, apparently, since she did not share the information. Mia lost her temper. She began to transform. She was going to be interrogated. That wouldn't happen. His job is to check for threats, so he checks everyone. The operator demanded an answer from Mia, but she turned her back to him and was about to leave. Two forces collided, operators collided. No one wanted to give in or compromise. They fought by attacking each other using their abilities and skills. There was a powerful explosion, such that it covered everything around with its shroud. One could go blind from it. The floating Mia was surprised by her attack. Her eyes widened, and she was discouraged by further events. In the middle of their battle, dividing the two sides in half, the assistant moderator stood and looked at the two operators with a calm gaze. Protzi answered, in a tone that did not tolerate objections, that contractions were prohibited here. Destroyed columns, which were now only half standing, debris and dust everywhere. That's what became of the place. The operators dispersed in different directions when Mia received a warning about caution because he did not want to see her in the ranks of his enemies. And then the girl's memories took her away to the time when she was a little girl, sitting alone on the floor and crying into her knees. She was given a helping hand. She did not forget this. When it was necessary, she was supported by a man in a hood. The rest of the operators stood and watched as Mia left and as Zen looked after her. They saw that the girl was angry and they were interested in what happened, but they did not see the whole battle. The operators began to have doubts about Mia's loyalty because Zen would not have started a fight so easily. At this time, two people were sitting in the city and having a conversation. Ari was interested in why Aiden refused to join the guild. They sat at the table and drank a drink. The guy does not regret that he refused. Smiling, Ari thought that being in a guild was good, but the young man thought that she would be against it. But the guild is also part of this world. Moreover, the girl continued, she knows the head of Griffin. He is a good person. Aiden took on a thoughtful look. Ari agreed that if he wants, she will contact the head of the guild. But the young man proposed a simply crazy idea to create his own guild. The girl opened her mouth. Sarah made changes in the village of Irch. She did everything as the master told her. After talking with her at the hospital, warning her not to worry about the materials, I ended the call. Jack approached the girl, wanted to know what it was. The men from their village also showed curiosity. Sarah pushed the man in the back, urging him to complete the task from Aiden. The guy turned to Ari. Something else is needed to open a guild. It turned out that the hall is the bare minimum that is needed. They will wait for the completion of construction. Now they have free time, and slowly they walked down the street. The fire was burning. It was getting brighter and brighter. The call tower was waiting in the wings. Aiden walked towards this tower. He looked at it. This tower is visited more often than other places by players. There are monsters on each floor. You need to defeat one to move to the next level. It's enough for them to have fun and gain experience, while the rest are looking for treasures. Fun is good, but he will do everything conscientiously, since he was going to be a moderator, but Ari called him out. Turning to the girl, he heard that the level is not important here. What is important is the ability to combine abilities. They approach the players. Ari wanted to see what class abilities Aiden uses before going to the tower. He turned to the girl, showed her his scoreboard. She thanked him and looked at his abilities. Sweat rolled down Ari's cheekbone. She looked and couldn't believe her eyes. Ari was speechless. She peered at the numbers and asked Aiden what it was. Turning to the guy, she began to swear, where did such skills come from? The guy didn't understand what was going on. They were like that from the very beginning. Aiden looked surprised. He believed that the players had the same thing. He was curious. But he didn't see the players' ability points, and Ari understood why his stats weren't increasing. The girl again looked up at the abilities. She had not seen this even in the operators. Ari smiled. She was right. Aiden was special, and if he continues to grow like this, then very good. He will quickly become a moderator, because all the data he has is conducive to this. There should be no difficulties. A monster with an open, toothy mouth was attacking. Its eyes were small, and its body, on the contrary, was too large. Aiden cut this monster with a sharp spear, jumped up, and the monster split into two halves. 3 monsters are on the guy's way, but he is ready for an attack and calmly meets them. Ari watched how the young man could easily and alone cope, combine his abilities himself. Everything worked out great for him. Aiden surprised with his combat readiness when compared with his SS level and skill requirements. It was easy for the guy to fight the monsters, but Ari was glad that with each level, everything became more complicated. Aiden stopped. He wanted to know where the end of the tower was. The girl came closer, on the 50th floor. The young man approached the flight of stairs. He needed to go through all the levels faster. He went through floor after floor, level after level. He came across both bosses and ordinary monsters. He coped with them all. On the 49th floor, we met a monster with horns, who was holding a large axe and raised it at our hero. The attack was strong, it struck. A wave went across the ground, there was dust. Nothing could be seen. The monster was strong, and if it hit Aiden, it would be bad for him. He was agile and struck well. He looked down at his hands. The guy used magic, acceleration, and physical effort. Aiden was ready to meet the enemy, although it was his first time using such abilities, but he believed in himself. In a jump, he delivered his blow. The magical creature stood and accepted this punishment. The blow was of enormous force. His hand was covered with a golden color, and from the blow, the monster flew several flights down. The guy stopped, the floor was cleared, the level increased. For him, it was simple. Aiden stood and looked at the top. At the top floor, only he remained. The fire was flaring up there. He stood up, a portal opened in front of him, wide and black. The guy looked inside. A terrible, huge muzzle stuck out of the hole, with a sharp nose with an elongated nose. This guy was the final boss. He was huge, red, with big hands and with a staff. So he screamed, grabbed the staff with both paws, and red light poured out of it. Having separated them from the outside world, the two of them are left trapped against each other, and the battle begins. Because of this barrier, Aiden's levels were reduced by half, and he stared at it in disbelief. The hero realized that it would be difficult for the players to fight such a monster, because he was several times taller than the young man, and his strength did not diminish. Aiden is a bad opponent for him. He turned on the ability to resist the anomalous state. Even the monster's best skill didn't work on the guy. He stuck his hand into the vault. Sticking a huge sword out of storage, the guy decides to finish this all quickly. Letting out a roar, the creature rushed at Aiden, and the battle began. The red monster struck with his staff. The guy parried the blow with his sword. The sword and spear crossed, striking. There was a ringing sound. There was a smell of smoke. There was smoke all around. A huge stone was thrown by the creature, and it flew towards Aiden. Getting closer, he could not dodge it, but he managed to concentrate his power. His fingers sparkled on his palm, and blue balls appeared around him. He sent his power to the monster. A guy stood. He had a sword in one hand, and with the other, he controlled his abilities. The young man ran, trying to throw his sword at the monster. Strength was burning on his sides. He rushed decisively, without stopping. He waved, cutting the final boss in half with his sword. The young man remained in a bent position. Without unbending, he watched what would happen next. The toothy muzzle cried out. Empty eye sockets stared somewhere upward, and the magical creature began to disintegrate into pieces. A glow suddenly appeared on the floor. The flash went somewhere higher. Aiden could be congratulated. He stood in his hands with a sword, exhaled air, reaching his personal record. The floor was cleared. This content was better than the guy expected. Now there was nothing for him to do here. He looked around in search of a way out, but there was none. There was only a portal that had appeared from somewhere. While the guy was in his thoughts, Ari came up. She congratulated him and did not expect him to immediately reach the top. Unable to complete all the levels on the first try, she was pleasantly surprised by his ability. Aiden pointed his finger at the growing portal, asked the girl what it was. She came closer. She was also surprised. She didn't know where he was leading. Her mouth opened, but she couldn't say anything. But unexpectedly, the girl said that she didn't see anything. It was strange, because the guy was definitely looking at the spreading black window. Touching the portal with his finger, the finger began to crumble. It was surprising why only the guy could see it. Not only the finger began to crumble, but the whole guy was carried into the portal. Ari was scared. She didn't know what it was. The girl shouted at him to leave, but the young man could no longer do it. He was sucked into the portal, and he could not get out. Opening her mouth and holding out her hand, Ari ran to the disappearing Aiden, but it was too late. The girl could not help. The guy's figure flew down in pitch darkness. He fell down and could not understand the reasons why this happened. He flew somewhere towards buildings in which there were monsters and players, as if he was watching the battles from the sidelines. Finally, his fall was stopped, so he stood in front of some building in the form of blocks. Looking around, Aiden tried to understand what kind of place this was, but nothing came to his mind. A blue light flowed around the guy. It was leading him somewhere. The guy looked. That light seemed familiar to him. He followed this light, walked across the bridge, and saw a door with the number 3 on it. The young man continued on his way. Without going inside, a sign with a task floated in front of Aiden. He began to read it, where his quest would lead him this time. The task was forgotten. A strange and interesting task. The man watched carefully. A good reward awaited after. Looking at the scoreboard, he heard his name. Someone was persistently calling him, trying to understand where this voice was coming from. It was Ari. She contacted him through the pendant given to her. She was glad that he was okay. She couldn't contact him, so the pendant was very useful and asked him to determine her location. Ari walked and talked with the guy. She had difficulty finding a way out of the tower, and now they had a problem. The girl has never seen anything like this. She can get there and break through the defense, but it will attract attention. She would find another way out, so she asked him to wait for Aiden. He had no choice but to tell the truth. He can leave here as he wants. He uses the window. He slowed down the impetuous Ari. If something happened, Aiden would contact her, she understood. She wished him to be careful. He opened the doors and entered until he saw nothing unexpected. There was a corridor inside. But having walked a little forward, the mouth opened by itself because magical creatures stood on the side in the corridor and were dozing. Aiden was surprised. He looked at the monsters. They all didn't move. Why didn't he know there were so many monsters here? Realization flashed through him. It was because they had failed to update. His eyes widened. Suddenly, a hovering robot appeared in front of him. The guy got scared and recoiled from it. The robot was wondering how he got here, and Aiden was dumbfounded that the guard was talking. Apart from the administrator, no one is allowed to enter here. The guard looked at him menacingly, a high security system. All the sleeping monsters began to wake up and surround the young man. He was shocked by such a denouement. The guard felt the power that came from the guy. It was similar to the administrator's. He raised his head listening. But the robot knew that he was not the administrator, so everyone else must be exterminated. Monsters rushed at Aiden. Dogs with open mouths, horned red monsters. They all attacked at the same time. But the guy was not at a loss, took out his sword, and went into a retaliatory attack, cutting and hacking at these monsters. Looking back, the man saw the dissected bodies of the monsters as he tried to defeat them. Taking the hammer out of storage, Aiden must give it his all. Standing with his hammer, from which a bright light began to emanate, the guy was ready to rush into battle. The young man spun into a funnel which caught almost all the monsters attacking him. A tired guy stood and held a fiery sword in his hands, and that's how the hammer became a sword from the power of the moderator. The man looked at the robot, connected to it, and gave orders to look after the tower for him. He had blue hair and a black cloak. Many players are waiting for your update. The guard understood one thing. He must protect this place at all costs. This is now his mission. Everyone moved towards Aiden, including the floating guard, because they had a mission to protect this place. But the guy also had a task. Determination in his eyes. To go to the end, he had already overcome a lot and would not give up. The monsters were advancing. There were many of them, and they were all different. But the young man also ran towards them. He grabbed the axe tightly in his hands, a reminder of his sister on his wrist, and prepared to crush his enemies. He struck the ground, and along with the scattered stones, the monsters also fell from such a blow. Only the guard remained, but he was also touched by the blow. His hand fell off, but he continued to stand his ground. Although the guard was hidden in the smoke, Aiden saw him and his sword moved towards him. Taking step by step, the guy stepped on the floor and lowered his eyes. This time stepping, he saw that the floor began to diverge under his foot. A huge worm crawled out from under the floorboards. Another monster, long and scary. Despite his size, despite his strength, Aiden rushed towards him from above with a sword. And he took off his head, chopped it, separating the head from the body. The monster howled, but it was all too late. The creature crashed to the floor. A wave of dust erupted from it. The young man managed to run away. He looked at his sword. He was tired just from waving it. A drop of sweat ran down his cheek. Now there was only one guard and a warrior left. He decided to finish it all quickly. But the guard was not so simple. He looked at Aiden's abilities and saw that he couldn't handle this sword, so he had to come up with something. He began to build blocks, blocking the path of the hero and himself, but despite the obstacle, the guy moved forward. Aiden struck. The explosion was strong. The hero was burning in a red spot, and the guard was not visible. A sword pierced through the barrier. The sword was aimed at the defender of the tower. Aiden flew with a blow. The blow was delivered. Only half of the side remained. It went out slowly. With a burning, punitive sword, the guy flew through it without turning around, knowing that he was able to achieve his goal. I came up to see the warrior's defeat. He fell. Everything was in smoke. The robot was created for the system. It hovered, calculating its abilities, and flew past monsters. He is moving for the sake of the system, and now it will finally happen. The update will be done. When the robot opened its eyes, a girl and a guy appeared in front of it. The girl smiled joyfully, turning to the boy. The system guard has consciousness. It's amazing. The guy turned with his mouth open to Eri. This was the first time she had seen something like this, the girl continued, and the robot stared at his hand, his open palm. The defender was already looking at 2 palms, his eyes wide. He had now acquired a human form. Aiden looked at the defeated man and was surprised that there was someone like that among the guards. In the body cut in half, something sparkled and shone red. Curious about what it was, the guy crouched down and tried to get it. Stretching out his hand, he saw the ball. In his hand, he held a ball. This ball glowed and sparkled red. It was the size of his hand. Then he was distracted by Ari, who called just in time. She was walking along the city street. When Aiden showed the girl this ball, she examined it with interest and praised him for his luck in meeting a high-level guard. The guy was sitting at the table. The girl was talking about these guards. They are rare, but you can meet them. They differ in strength from ordinary ones. They may be stronger than the operators, but since the administrator does not give them full power, they behave like this. Aiden was quite curious about all this. It's a pity that they left him without attention. Eri confirmed that there was no update. Looking at the red ball in his hand, the guy thought that if he updated everything, the problem would be solved. The body was gone. It was necessary to connect itself. It had so many questions, but no answers. A new entity was discovered in the system. Red threads pierced the former guardian. The update started working. The body was being created. Aiden looked at what was happening before his eyes. The guy looked at the scoreboard. He was a simple non-player character, and now an administrator. It was strange. We need to choose a name for the former guard, Aiden thought, and decided to call him Theodore. Theodore looked at his hands. His eyes were widened. He did not understand how this could be. The update had passed. He looked at Aiden, and there was a question in his eyes, but all he said out loud was that he had been updated. The young man looked straight at his creation. A smile even tried to appear on his face. Theodore knelt down and lowered his head in front of Aiden, who was surprised, but he heard the guy thank him. Leaning lower, barely exhaling, this was his greatest desire, closing his eyes. From this very moment, no matter what happens, he will follow him, the administrator, came from Theodore. In the place where daisies grow, a portal opened in the middle of this expanse. It cut the space with a black hole. From this portal emerged a monster with 1 eye and horns on its head. It swore as its place was found. He was upset. Hundreds of his copies had already disappeared. Apparently, this time the administrator was determined. He squinted his eyes. If he stays here, he will also be removed, the man thought. Seeing the monster, he extended his palm and light gushed from it, destroying this creature. Used irreversible removal, an ability in which the monster will never return. He thought so. The big one was hidden. Something was trying to get out from under the ground. The ground shook. The man in black stood and watched as the ground parted, and a monster much larger than the previous ones emerged. The black shadow of a terrible monster with 1 eye hung over the moderator. She had been waiting for this hour for a long time. The man was hovering above, and the shadow was approaching to attack. He did not want to delay, because he had to end this. The virus channeled its power into a beam that pierced the escaping moderator, but he would not retreat from it. The impact contributed to the creation of a vacuum, such that a dome of a wave formed above the ground, which could destroy everything in its path. The horned monster looked at the creation of protection. Someone saved the moderator from death. It was Procy. She created a defense. Her gaze was serious, her face concentrated. Putting her hands forward, she made a barrier. Behind her stood the moderator, safe and sound. The girl looked at him half a turn. She was asking if everything was okay with him. She was worried about him. Pulling out her weapon, she began to approach the virus with a light gait. She could handle it herself. But the moderator put his gloved hand on her shoulder and whispered that everything was okay, thereby stopping her. Having brought the girl behind him, the moderator came forward. He could handle it himself, Procy exclaimed, but said nothing. And the administrator headed forward through the dust towards his goal to fight the virus. There is no end to viruses. When he was busy searching, they grew very much. He raised his hand and began to take off his mask. Blue hair appeared on his head. He began to say something. Taking off his mask, it crumbled in his hands. Now he was fed up. His face was tired, blue hair and an artificial eye. He rose higher to float at the monster's level and headed towards the virus. The virus was confused, some kind of dark space. It had not encountered this before. Apparently, the moderator plans to make sure that the purple monster cannot escape. At this rate, everything will be deleted. The man was not joking when he said that he was tired of the virus. The virus dissipated. Its copies tried to get out and escape. The guy looked at them with a bored look. The power was concentrated in his hand. He would now throw it after them. He was irritated by their flickering. The virus will be completely removed in this place. The moderator has decided so, and this is final. The administrator lit up. This light came from his chest and spread to everything around him. The guy walked back through the smoke. In his hands, he had a ball into which all the viruses flowed. The ball that was in the hands of the moderator crumbled as he squeezed his hand, and it was all over for the virus. The man stood on the slope of the peaks. His cloak was blown by the wind. He looked down. His whole appearance was sorrow. This man fell to his knees, grabbed his chest. Something purple dripped from his chest onto the ground. It was a worm. There was blood at the corners of his lips. He is now unable to restore his copies. The administrator extended his hand and straightened the collar of his coat as he walked forward. Protzi saw the moderator. He was already putting on a mask, a new one, pulling it over his face with his hand. The open figure went into the portal without looking back. The girl stood looking after him. The pose was slightly tense. He sat down in a chair. He felt comfortable. No one was visible around him. He sat on his throne, looked at all the data, controlled absolutely everything. Then he receives a letter with information from Zen, with the inscription confidential. He paid attention to this. Mia appeared on the screen. The letter talked about her strange behavior lately. The moderator realized that at some point Mia and Ari met, so anything is possible. Staring at the monitors, he thought that this could happen because she began to watch Ari too much. The moderator remembered Ari, a girl with blue hair and a sad face. He also remembered Aiden. He deleted him with his own hands. He was very surprised how he turned out to be alive and still with the abilities of an administrator. The man thought that this was a new virus, and he needed to act now. He failed to complete the operation. This meant only one thing, that administrator had become superior to him. The moderator turned to the table and saw that he was in second place. He found the other one, but in what way? Having studied it carefully, he realized that this was everything. This was a Trojan. Such a discovery was unexpected for him. The man called Prosi. She obediently bowed her head, waiting for instructions. But this time, he would go on a mission himself. He began to type something on the board. They need to act without traces, so that Aiden does not find out what they know. A guy appeared on the screen. They need him, so they need to act carefully, Portzi understood and agreed. The moderator will put everything on the line, everything he has, but he will get Aiden. The girl listened to him with her eyes closed. Among the mountains and grass, some kind of veil could be seen in the distance. Some kind of portal was open. Seeing this, Theodore, lowering his head but looking from under his forehead, decidedly wanted to go there and find out what was there. The guy's words made Aiden turn half a turn to him. He continued that he would do everything in his power. The hero slowed down Theodore's impulse. Even if this was decided in the village, no one would be late. Turning to the girl, Aiden asks if all the guards are like this, to which she laughs, because they only move because of the administrator, so yes. The young man was curious to know about the monsters and guardians who had been neglected in recent times, so he listened to Ari very carefully. Demonic monsters are also part of the system, and it is the guardians who must control the appearance of these monsters. Aiden turned around sharply. He was dumbfounded. It was all a lie. His mouth dropped open from such information. Demonic creatures are just equipment for the growth of players. Folding his arms on his chest was the answer to all the questions from the man. Ari extended her fist to try her defense. They will never die because the system protects them. Indeed, what will make you die is either infection with a virus or deletion. Aiden touched his chin with his fingers. It shocked him to be in a lie all the time. The monsters never raided the village since they were under the control of the system all this time. The girl pointed with her hand to the place they needed, hurried the guy, they arrived. They looked down on the village of Urch. It had changed a little. Now it had been restored. Two small children sat in the forest under a large tree and poked the creature with sticks. An adult turned to them. They looked up at him and they lit up with joy. It was Aiden. He was interested in how they were and if everything was okay with them. He looked at these two. The guys rushed to hug him. They interrupted each other, asking questions, laughing. With their mouths open, they looked at the guy. Their uncle went to the dungeon and they talked about this. There was an excellent building, a transparent sky above without a hint of clouds. Strange sounds were heard from the house. Screaming, they ran into the building, opening the door. Sarah and the watchman ran in. They were sweating. Aiden and Ari were sitting at the table. Those who ran in began to be indignant about the need to warn, talk about their arrival. But the guy didn't come for long. He came to visit. The young man noticed that the level of these two had increased. This was probably due to recent events. They were interested in the man who stood behind the gentleman. His hands were behind his back, and he was looking intently. Taking a closer look at them, he revealed that he saw them as operators, so he was pleased to meet them. Theodore introduced himself, saying that he was here to help Aiden, a high-ranking guard. The two were surprised. Sarah brought her hand to her mouth as soon as she heard about the guard. Everyone sat down at the table. They were curious how it happened that such a guard turned out to be one of the assistants, because they are very talented, as Sarah said. Aiden is already tired of this story about the guard. He would rather take an interest in the affairs of the village. Noticing something wrong on their faces, the guy tensed. The girl folded her hands and began to tell. Players came to the village. Aiden didn't like it, but Jack calmed him down. They just exchanged some items and didn't cause any trouble. The man watched the players, they listened to the residents' requests, stayed for 2 days, and that's it. The hero exhaled, closed his eyes. It's good that nothing bad happened. But now Jack and Sarah are preparing for the next meeting. Ari grabbed her head. She knew this would happen, but she didn't expect it to happen so quickly. Although she tried to remove the village from the search, it is not on the map, so it is surprising how it was found. But if someone is looking specifically for this place, that's a different question, a different matter. The possibility of searching increases. Aiden closed his eyes. This place cannot be completely blocked, so we need to prepare to meet the players. The couple looked scared. If something happens in the village, it is necessary to warn Ari or him, the guy finished. Theodore called out to the man. He turned to him. He also wanted some kind of task. The guard bowed his head. He really wanted to help his administrator. Aiden remembered him. The hero just had something for him, so he returned to the village. Hearing this, Theodore beamed. Aiden stood up, leaned on the table. He was ready to test. Ari screamed. She didn't know what needed to be tested. He looked with a sly look. He received another command that needed to be carried out. Aiden moved with the girl towards a high rock. The villagers looked at him and were nearby. More and more people came up. Everyone was wondering what the guy wanted to do. This quest will bring him a lot of benefits. His gaze was determined. He needs to complete this task. I looked at Ari. I need to create content so he has a new ability. Turning around and looking at the girl, he will show her what content he will create. Everything around lit up red. It enveloped this rock in a ball of light. The grass and trees bent. Aiden was falling. He remembered that he needed this. He flew down, looked down. He was flying in the tower. Last time he was already in it. Now he was again hovering around it. What he needs is not just a copy. He took a small ball in his hand. Having already grabbed this ball with both hands, giving it the desired image, he knew what to do. Aiden exhaled. Now I need to come up with a name. I thought about it a little. What to call it. Opening his mouth, the guy cried out, completely engulfed in radiance, that now this is a tower of testing. All his people stood and watched what was happening. An explosion of red. Ari stood closer to the tower. Everyone was surprised. It became bigger. They looked at it with their mouths open. Aiden was able to do it. The tower became larger, more beautiful. The colors shimmered. It all played with colors. The entrance became visible from afar. Aiden appeared. He leaned his hands on his knees and exhaled. He was too tired. He turned to Theo, who stood behind him, ready for anything, with his arms crossed behind his back. Aiden left control of this tower to him, tall and powerful. It attracted the gaze of many. But you need to look after not only the tower, but also the residents of the village of Urch. Theodore whispered, barely audible, that you can rely on him. He will be responsible for this as for himself. Aiden was pleased with this answer. He looked at him, smiled at the corner of his mouth. A drop of sweat rolled down his cheekbone. His legs buckled and he would have fallen down if not for Ari's support. She grabbed his shoulder. The girl picked him up, helped him get there. She praised him. He did a good job. The city was located among the trees. Screams were heard in the square, interrupting each other. Two men argued with each other. One did not believe the other, but he tried to prove it with foam at the mouth. The man went into memories, remembered how the guy was driving a wheelbarrow with various rare things that were difficult to get. They thought it was some kind of event, but for their village, these are ordinary things. The guys were very surprised. He invited the men to see with their own eyes while no one yet knew about this place. But one of the men, raising his hand to his mouth, remembered that he had once been in the village and it was an ordinary place. The shadow stood nearby, looked out from behind the house, eavesdropped. It was very interesting to hear about this village. The eavesdropper was a man with scratches. He grinned, thinking that the guys were fools and talked a lot. Having thrown out his bag, he looked at his friend carrying the bag and ordering him to throw it away. But the other guy didn't listen to him. He needs to get to work. They won't be accepted anywhere else. He himself knows the reason. The man leaned forward. He smelled money, and another guy stood behind him, not believing him. A familiar road, a lot of grass and a mill, a calm sky, and a voice predicting that it is already there. The men walked towards the village. One looked at the map, but saw nothing there, he believed the first. They looked at the village while standing on a hill. They were glad that they did not see other players. Apparently, they had not found out yet. Suddenly, they saw something that caught their attention. looking up from the map and staring with their mouths open. There was nothing for a few more minutes, and then a tower grew up, the same bright, big one. Opening their mouths, they looked at what had grown in front of them. It looked like a tower of tests. This was new content. I immediately went to my scoreboard to see if there was an update, but I didn't see anything, so it was all quite strange. Rejoicing, they ran downstairs, eager to be first, calling each other. The third one scratched his head with his hand. He couldn't do anything about it, so it didn't matter. The players went down to the village. As they walked, they looked around, and people stared at them too. But they didn't notice anything unusual and began to doubt it until the third player convinced them. They noticed a forge and decided to go in there and check it out to see what was there. There, two men were knocking on the sword with fire tongs. They did not notice anyone or anything around. Tired of work, they exchanged words with each other and decided to rest. Thanks to Aiden, the life of the villagers has changed too much. The changes were for the good. The players entered the forge, their eyes lit up. They saw the tools. The men also remembered them. The resident coughed into his fist, attracting the players' attention. He wanted to know what he could do for him. My eyes ran over the armor and sword. I wanted all this, but there was no price tag, so it was impossible to buy. Probably they are not for sale, the player wanted to clarify. The residents looked at each other. They didn't need money, but there was a request. Then he would give them whatever he wanted. The players were surprised. Their eyes widened. The village has everything in abundance. But there is only one thing missing. The players listened with bated breath. The problem was the food, the taste. You couldn't get good ingredients nearby, so you had to share the food. The players were surprised. They screamed. For them, it was not a problem. They would immediately take them from the warehouse. The main thing is that they would not go back on their words later. But the warehouse was empty. Two people ran out. The older one stayed. He was surprised. This was not a quest. But another player was approaching the village gate. His boots were already pointed towards the square. It was those two who were scratched. They also reached this village. They will take the chance now. But when he entered the village, this man behaved disgracefully, opening the doors with a kick while grinning. Entering the room, they looked around, scaring the residents. It was a nurse and a watchman, an ordinary house. It didn't matter, they thought. But at the same time, having entered there, they began to destroy everything, open everything without asking. The guy tried to stop them, but there was no result. The watchman tried to drive them out and asked not to touch them, to which the man turned to him and threateningly clarified what he wanted. The man got angry. Someone tried to refuse the players. He grabbed the guy by the collar. The girl screamed in fear. Smiling, he raised his fist to strike, saying that the enemies needed to be removed quietly. The guy could not do anything. He just waved his hand. But the player's fist rested against the defense, never reached the target, and the guard froze with clenched teeth. The player was surprised. He didn't know what it was. A question came from the door. What was he doing? Sarah saw this whole picture. She was angry. He probably wants to die, this player. Aiden slowly came to his senses, opened one eye, then carefully the other, exhaled air from his mouth. Suddenly, he was blown up. He jumped up, clutching the blanket, a frightened look, trying to remember what happened. The guy clenched his fist. Using commands does not have a good effect on his body. Ari was nearby. Seeing that the young man had woken up, she turned to him, smiling. Aiden was pleased that the girl stayed with him. But for her, he is a special person, he should have understood. While he was getting dressed, asking leading questions, Ari answered everything willingly. Over time, he learned to apply commands evenly. Leaving the room, opening the door, he saw that the residents were greeting him, and they were glad that he woke up. They were worried about him, wanted to know how he was feeling, and when they heard that everything was fine, they seemed to calm down. Pushing everyone aside, Sophia, the nurse, rushed towards him. She called Aiden. She ran very quickly. Having reached him, she began to breathe, was tired of running, spoke confusedly, was in a hurry. The player who came was behaving inappropriately. Aiden flew, rushing headlong to help. He did not wait for Sophia's explanation. Residents passed by and did not notice the place where the player was, but the guy found him. Having landed, Aiden saw shadows dancing from the hole. Something was happening. He began to approach closer. Having fallen out of the house, dust was flying in all directions. The man buried himself in his sleeve. He coughed. Sarah also appeared from a hole in the wall. Her compressed lips spoke of her anger. She followed the players. Power bubbled around her, but then she noticed Aiden and slowed down. The guys also followed her gaze. The guy recognized this man. He was a blacksmith and broke his weapon, screamed. He stared at him. The girl was surprised. She did not know that the gentleman knew these players. Everything became clear to Aiden. He was probably scouring the area in search of valuables. Apparently, he didn't understand anything. After losing all his money, his clenched teeth betrayed the player's anger. Swearing, the man climbed into his vault. He sent a curse to Aiden. Today he wanted him to die. With a distorted face, the player ran towards the hero, holding a sword in his hands. He thought that he would do some harm. The blow took him by surprise. He did not expect such a blow from the blacksmith. The blow was strong that it crushed his face. The fist was Jack's. He shouted at the man that he needed to treat the young man more respectfully. The blow threw him to the ground. Covered in abrasions and blood, he did not understand how this could happen because he was a player chosen by the system. The players became afraid of what kind of place this is where non-player characters have power. None of this would have happened if Aiden had not ruined the sword. He thought about it. The characters waited, looked straight. In honor of the apology, he is ready to fix it, improve it. He took out his hammer. The guy smiled. The player was confused and did not immediately agree, to which the young man replied that he would take it seriously. They ran away wearing only t-shirts from this village. Because the forging did not work out, they shed tears. They ran away and shouted their empty threats. Aiden turned to give the order for the blacklist. No matter how, the hero wanted them to never be able to return to the village again. While Aiden is the moderator of this place, he will not allow the players to behave as they want, he said decisively. His operators looked at him with admiration in their eyes. There was no need to adapt to the players anymore. They must be ready. Many more players will come. There is no point in hiding, Aiden thought, raised his hand to his mouth. Sarah nodded. We need a plan if the players come. Ari confirmed that the village system is different, so it is unknown what the players will do and how they will behave. Attracting as many players as possible, that's the hero's plan. Everyone opened their mouths. They didn't expect such words. The guy clenched his fist. The content will be useful to the players. They will come here. There's no point in hiding. If this happens, then neither operators nor administrators will be able to get rid of this place, he summed up. Holding hands, the young man ordered. He had long wanted to do this. He immediately warned them not to be shocked by what they saw. They were all at once covered in a red web, and they began to fall somewhere in a red place. It was a system space. Everything is fine. You need to stay calm, Aiden reacted to the cry of the two. He shared his power. This shocked them. They can now use cloud storage. They were shocked. There was a weapon that could protect the village. Sarah and Jack could use it, and he would do everything to protect the village of Urch. From now on, they should become serious, the guy suggested, smiling. The challenge tower was visible from afar. Players were guided by it. They were drawn to new content. Aiden watched as more and more players began to appear. The tower should do its job. Ari stood behind the hero. She was interested in how he felt, because he had already done a lot. His karma increased due to the fact that the village attracted a lot of problem guys. He also thanked Theodore, who had simplified everything for the master. He also stood behind him. Putting his hand to his chest, he made a slight bow. But he was very flattered by Aiden's attention, even though he did everything within the Guardian's bounds. They have everything under control, everything is fine, and the tower is also in good condition. There are also differences from previous content, but it is perceived very positively by the players. Aiden liked all of it. The young man gave the order that if any problems arise, quick communication with him is necessary. The guy looked into the distance. He would like to attract even more players. Release the power from his hand. He understood that the players most want development, and he will provide it to them. The players stared at their scoreboard. It was glowing red. Everyone was waiting. When they saw the announcement of double points in the tower, they whispered among themselves, thinking it was crazy. They could get a buff for a resident's request. This has never happened before. They need to take advantage of the chance. And the whispering began. Now it's impossible to sit idle. Everyone must come here. The players signaled to each other, sent messages. Watching what was happening on the screen, Aiden was glad that everything was developing as he had planned. Ari was deep in thought. She didn't want to let her guard down, especially now. She thought about it because the moderators would notice, and decided to call Mia to find out about the stop. A rumor was spread in all cities about the village of Urch, which had become open again. The players whispered about whether it was true. They didn't want to waste time. They were in a hurry to the village. A girl with an apple in her hand heard out of the corner of her ear. Having bitten off an apple, the girl in the hood began to chew thoughtfully, looking after the running guys. A powerful, strong, and very dark building stood motionless. Only the flag and coat of arms of the Hydra Guild fluttered slightly. Clan people sat at the table and reported on problems and how they could be solved. Only one stood out in color from everyone. It was a council of elders. They discussed matters. Hydras were on their shoulders. In between, they wanted to know about one person, about Dune. Lowering his head, no one knew how badly he was beaten, but his level had dropped. The head of the clan with a serious face, his eye covered with a blindfold, demanded an explanation. Guildmaster Dunkus, with a level of 400, lounged on a chair. He put one hand under his cheek. Dripping with sweat, Evan began to explain himself. Everything was going well, until the ranker, whose image is there, appeared. The master looked carefully at the screen, and the girl seemed familiar to him. He recognized the blue hair. He was distracted from looking by a voice that screamed that he didn't believe it, and quickly hung up. He looked at him, waiting. And the news of receiving new content reached the Hydra Guild. Dunkus looked as if he did not believe the words of the speaker. Everything happened in the village of Urk. The master was interested in the guild that occupied this village. He narrowed his eyes, pursed his lips. He needs to act decisively. There are 5 guilds and no one knows anything about it. He slammed his hands loudly on the table. They must claim this place quickly before any guild takes over this place. The master decided to send elite members there to prepare them quickly. Dunkus was carried away by his thoughts. He did not understand why the update had just happened. A purple canvas appeared behind the master. He was also interested in the update. The man widened his eyes in fear. He exhaled. The appearance of the uninvited guest greatly frightened him. But when he saw who it was, the fear passed. He already warned not to suddenly appear in front of him like that, Dunkus reprimanded. It was Regus, the virus. He was wearing a golden helmet with double eyes. His hands were pulled back, and a stone was burning in his chest. Sweat ran down his cheek. He clenched his teeth and thought about what a bastard he was. But the virus didn't care what he said or thought. Regus heard about the village. He was curious. He demanded to know the details, but Dunkus himself knows nothing, since there was no announcement. The virus raised a black hand to its mouth. The administrators are not capable of creating something new, but it seems to have guessed who it could be. Regus remembered the worm and how he was watching some person. He did not want to listen to his orders. The virus orders them to be sent to the village. They must get someone first. Dunkus shouted loudly because those who needed to be sent were still in the experimental phase, and he was very afraid of the administrators who might find out about everything. Regus grinned. He assured him that there was nothing to be afraid of. The admins would not have time for that now. The created cheaters will cope with this task well, properly, because they were created by a virus. Again, the hall. Again, large columns through which the light falls. A large table at which the characters have gathered. Someone screamed loudly, put his hands on the table, slamming them so that the table vibrated. The guy with green hair was shouting at Mia. He didn't understand what she was saying. The others sat and listened attentively. Everyone turned their heads to her. They were dumbfounded by her statement that it was her last day as an operator. Duke was the most surprised of all. He looked at the girl with wide eyes, trying to digest what he heard. She remembered when she was little, she became an operator in order to help Ari. She accepted her, whom no one needed, very well, extended a helping hand, so Mia is very grateful to her. She would follow only her. The guy didn't understand. He didn't know who Ari was. The masked man also remembered this girl. Few knew her, only those who became the first operators. Mia was leaving. She would return the weapon to the silence of the others, and only Duke jumped up with her, trying to return her. But the voice of the masked man made the girl stop. She would not be allowed to leave so easily. He leaned on the chair to stand up. Normally, there would be no reason to stop her, but not now. The man went to her. He could not let her go on the orders of the administrator, because she would go in search of Ari. The girl sparkled. She imposed a taboo, endangered the administrator. After this incident, the leader changed. Memories jumped from one event to another. He knew Mia to be an excellent operator, and he would not want to put her in danger. But the guy stood in front of her. There is no need to make the wrong choice, because the administrator's words are not discussed. Frightened, Mia looked somewhere to the side. She invited him to stop her. The operators jumped up. They saw that a fight had started. No one could stop the two. They wanted to catch up with them, so they flew after them. Only Duke and Celia remained. She did not want to interfere. The girl looked with sad eyes. She would not get involved in this. Looked at everyone else. A bitter smile appeared on her lips. The battle was strong. Here and there, flashes of light. Explosions were visible. Destruction went along with the battle nearby. The guy's sword was aimed at Mia. He almost touched her, but she dodged him. The sword touched the girl's hair. She turned her angry face away from him, clenching her teeth. An explosion, fire, the earth opened up. This was a battle of the strongest. They were both the very first operators. They were not inferior to each other in strength. Zen fell underground. His foot fell into a hole. He wanted to get out quickly. Ten-Mi towered over the operator. Flames blazing behind her, she concentrated power in her hands. The blow hit the man, causing him to bend down so the force wouldn't hit him too hard. The rest of the operators stood above and watched. They were surprised at the scale of the destruction. Duke cried out. He had never seen a stronger battle. He needed to stop them, but he didn't know how. But he was afraid of death, because if he ended up there, that's what awaited him. This was not the case. An offer was made to team up with Zen, But Duke cried out. He was not happy with this. Someone called Mia. She pulled away from the attack, and this was her mistake. Luke rushed towards the girl. He put out his sword, and she was hit by him. She leaned her hand. She was surprised by the attack from him. He would also get in her way, and she would have to fight him too. Tired, Luke replied that the administrator's orders were not discussed. He agreed with Zen. He didn't listen to her. He believed that the admin was above all else. He swung his sword at Mia and clenched his teeth. But the girl hit the man in the stomach with a fiery fist. He bent over and flew away from her at a good distance. Coughing, he leaned on the sword, holding his stomach with his hand. He was slammed so that a furrow appeared behind him. Mia screamed that Eri does all this for a reason. They don't understand everything. Everything was for the administrator. The girl was always next to him, always stood behind him. If they try to stop her, then she will not hold back. She was ready for battle. Her hands burned with fire, her strength. She was full of determination. Luke held his stomach. A flame flared up under his hand. Fire walked under his hand. He looked at his hand. It was surprising to him that he was so battered by one blow. He looked to the side where the battle broke out. Luke was thinking about how to stop it now. The girl with the horns was watching Mia. She wanted to attack too. But the commands against the operators did not work. But the girl saw the attack from the side. She quickly pulled herself together, noticing the attack out of the corner of her eye. Having repelled the attack, Mia turned around in anger and walked towards the girl, who cursed and grabbed the knife tighter. Duke watched her from behind the hill, how they surrounded the girl, how she fought without giving up. Mia's strength flowed through her veins. Her hands were fiery, her eyes were blue. The difference in strength between the operators was noticeable. Luke and Izzy met each other. Both were ready for battle, but Mia was stronger. They weren't sure that they would win even if they attacked her together. She was very strong. Izzy grinned. She had been waiting for this for a long time. It had finally come to this. She spun around like a top. Luke looked at her and screamed, but the girl was already with Mia. Izzy was behind the girl. She looked sideways at her. They need to work together. There's no chance. The strongest operator, Mia, took the girl's hands by the knives, and she always wanted to fight with her for real. Luke immediately rushed at her with his sword raised. The girl turned in his direction, waiting. The girl's fiery fist met the sword, enveloping it in its fire. Mia looked up. She saw the tip of the sword right in front of her face. Her gaze wavered. The two of them attacked. Now Izzy struck. The girl clenched her teeth. Although she was ready, it was still unexpected. Attacking together, they began to succeed. From the explosion, a deep hole appeared in the ground. Together, they were able to repel Mia. Luke relaxed, but the girl demanded not to let down her guard. They knew that she couldn't lose like that, so they were on alert. And for good reason, Mia attacked. They had to dodge. Mia struck. She created a trap that surrounded these two with a thread. They climbed out of the hole, coughing. Even together, they could not cope with her. She was too strong. Beautiful in her strength, she towered over them. As soon as they saw the force directed at them, their eyes widened, fear splashing through them. Suddenly, Zen returned. He took out his sword and also went on the attack, stopping at nothing. All three attacked Mia. The dust was rising so that nothing was visible. One figure was just a girl against everyone. Zen walked towards the girl. He knew that she had become stronger. Much. Not the same when she first became an operator. He looked at her. If he doesn't do anything, he won't be able to cope with her. Apparently, some kind of trick is needed. The mask fell off his face and began to crumble. Mia decided that he would start acting seriously. Zen's head was lowered. His eyes were closed. His strength was not intended for this, but there was no way out. The tired face of a young man was hidden under the mask. His level had increased. Aiden hacked at the magical creatures, slicing them, his cloak developing as he was absorbed by the attack. The guy smiled. He liked what he did. Everything worked out for him, and therefore he set higher goals. His level was rising. He would continue in the same spirit. He really liked it all. Aiden was in a sandy area. He just needed such an area. There was nothing around, only swords stuck in the sand. Having opened the scoreboard, the guy demanded that Theodore be a stronger monster. He can handle it. He doesn't need rest. He was not alone. With Ari, everything was going well so far. The man wanted to pump himself up as much as possible. The girl was in her thoughts. She was waiting for an answer from Mia and was worried about her. She made a decision. She needed to find out what happened to her friend. She left Aiden. He wasn't alone, and he could handle it. Dust flew up. The young man had to cover himself with his sleeve from the light that Ari had left behind. He watched her and wondered where she flew. He was distracted from thoughts about the girl, Sarah, by her telling him that a crowd of players was moving. Aiden stared into space in surprise, he thought, because people were coming from the guild. Izzy stood and looked at the blue veil and did not believe how this was possible. The girl couldn't believe that Zen took off his helmet and his level increased. He was hiding such power under his mask. The guy was from the Dragonoid race. A majestic figure walked towards him to attack. Mia saw it approaching out of the corner of her eye. Expecting an attack, she was preparing, but her strength was running out. She looked at her fist, which was already bleeding. Her strength was on the edge. She was tired. An attacker was attacking her. He was flying, she saw. She tried to put her hand to stop the blow. They fought for a long time. Mia complicates everything, were Zen's words. He also had to sweat in this battle. She turned on her justice mode. She was driven into a trap, 2 large claw hands instead of hands. Maya directed a blow with force at Zen. He expected it, but turned his head. Space opened up above him. Suddenly, the girl sent her fist at the guy. He flew straight at him and looked. Luke and Easy stood and watched. They were amazed by this battle of the strongest. It was incredible. Zen uses the only thing that can block the girl, and that is the weapon of submission. He did something terrible, took out his sword and cut Mia flying at him. Everyone didn't expect this. They couldn't believe that he did it. Mia was in pain. She arched over, opened her mouth, and blood poured out of her mouth. No one could see anything. Everyone was in shock. The girl was lying on the ground. With his power given by the administrator, Zen has stripped her of her position and must take away the weapon of subjugation. Mia was lying on her stomach. She tried to rise with her hands. A trickle of blood flowed from her mouth. She was advised to be more obedient. Stretching out his hand to her, the administrator will decide what to do with her. Black-faced Zen finished. Light poured out. The explosion was nearby. It also touched the man. He covered himself with his sleeve. Ari appeared in front of Mia. The girl couldn't believe it when she saw her. Her eyes lit up. Ari took the baby in her arms and looked sadly at the operators. A challenge was visible in her gaze. Mia pressed herself as tightly as possible to the girl. Blood was flowing from the corner of her mouth, covered in abrasions and scratches. But she trusted her. Ari reassured Mia. She should have noticed earlier that an attacker was approaching them from above. Zen grimaced, his eyes narrowed in anger. Barely restraining himself, he shouted the girl's name. Having repelled the man's attack, he was surprised, because he thought that the system had blocked her abilities and skills. But she put out her hand to respond to the blow. Ari looked straight. She was determined to take Mia with her. Luke, Easy, and Zen stood their ground. They would not allow the girls to leave. Standing next to each other, they exchanged words. The man with horns ordered the use of a weapon of submission. Arya was the very first operator, equal in strength even to the administrator himself. With her presence, the girl put pressure on the operators, taking her favorite pose. Easy looked at her palm. It was shaking. Surprised by her reaction to the girl, Ari exhaled, closed her eyes. She just came for the baby, and everything turned out like this. Izy's face darkened, and she wanted to test how effective her power was against the power of the former first operator. Flying up from behind, she began to descend. Ari was calm. She didn't even flinch. There were no sudden movements. The girl simply put out her fist, which stuck in Easy's stomach. The blow was such that the girl flew away and broke through the wall, leaving a mark on the ground. Trembling, she rose from under the rubble of stones with difficulty, leaning her hands on her legs. Ari was worried that she had hit her too hard, because Procy doesn't like things being broken here. The next attacker was a man, taller than her and wearing armor, and he swung his sword over her. But he also flew away from her with a whistle, also leaving a mark on the ground. Ari put out her hand, and lightning rolled from her fingertips, another of her abilities. Lightning carried out the attacker. He got up, but did not understand how this was possible. He was surprised that the lightning attack was of an average level, but the power of the strike made him wonder. The girl was all shining, her power swirled around her, filled her with itself. She was a monster, the operators decided. She noticed Zen approaching her from behind. She was waiting for the attack, and it happened. Taking the sword, she held it with her hand, attacking her without a weapon of submission. She had a better opinion of the man. Zen looked at her indignantly. She has no right to tell him how to fight. The man held his sword ready. He was very angry, concentrating his power around himself. Their weapons came together. Their blades clashed. They stared at each other, rage flashing in their eyes. The antivirus protects the most important, open face and such a decisive look on a man. Flying away from her, Zen shouted at her that these were her duties, but she did not perform them well. Raising the sword above his head to strike, he continued to shout that it was her fault that Administrator Asper had become. The girl stood. A wave of light moved towards her in the form of a blow. Her hair fluttered from the wind. She raised her weapon to strike, waving it and preparing to run towards him. Suddenly, in front of these two, standing in the middle and stopping the battle, Asper, he took their weapons into his own hands. The moderator looked at them sadly. He had not seen Aerie for a long time. In the forest, among the trees, a round portal opened. It turned black. drawing people towards it, beckoning. Mia flew out of this portal. She opened her mouth and exhaled. Her whole face was scratched and her clothes were torn. She fell to her knees, leaning on her hands, her lowered head indicating that she was exhausted. Gritting her teeth, she must not stop. She must move on. Looking at the amulet in her hand, she must hurry to tell him. Hiding in the forest, Mia will tell the truth. You need to hurry. Not even a twig moved from her movement. The players noticed the crowd moving towards the village. Their flags were flying. A black flag, it had 5-headed snakes on it. It was the Hydra Guild moving towards them. The players scattered to the sides. They wanted to hide as quickly as possible. They did not want to get involved with the guild. The man looked at the village skeptically. It was small, but he brought a lot of people. He grinned. No one did anything else. He was glad that they would take everything from here. The warrior turned to his army, raised his fist in the air, and ordered to have fun. Now this territory will be theirs. Someone was walking towards them from the village under the arch. Slowly, the army saw this and began to wait. The vice guild master came forward. He saw a man. It was Theodore. He wanted to know who he was. The order was given to him to get out of the way. Theo looked at them carefully, without saying anything. A weapon appeared behind the guard. It was floating in the air. There was a lot of it, and it was directed towards the guild. The bombs flew at people, began to explode. Their screams were heard in the silence. They shouted that he was crazy. The leader took out his sword and rushed to attack Theodore, grasping the weapon with both hands. But the sword did not touch the guard. He was protected by protection. He did not even flinch. He just looked at him. Theodore reached out and grabbed the vice guild master by the throat. He desperately clung to his hands but could not get out. The guard noticed from his observations that they were hostile, so he would stop them in the name of the master. The burning sword was brought to the face of the main one. They need to get out of here as quickly as possible. But someone's voice stopped Theo, approaching them. The crowd also stopped, watching what was happening. It was Aiden. He came up, folded his arms on his chest. Sarah and Jack stood behind him. If you kill them, they will still come back. He asked Theo to let the warrior go, and he fell to his feet, struggling to get up, ready to listen to them. The leader continued to lie there, his face grimaced in pain. Aiden asked a question and wanted to hear the answer. Looking at Theo, he thought to solve everything with his own power. But this guard ruined everything for him, trying to convince him. The leader looked at Aiden. He began to fawn over him, saying that they were not going to attack. They wanted to create a base here. When they learned about the new city, they are uncomfortable that they alarmed the residents. The man pointed to the crowd. They just need a base, nothing more. He persuaded Aiden that this was also good for them, that if there was a guild here, the market would be better. The man thought, raised his hand to his mouth. He listened carefully, and his gaze was penetrating. Aiden pretended to think about the proposal. The vice guild master grinned, believing that he believed it. The hero smiled openly, removed his hand from under his mouth. He refused such an offer. The warrior's smiling face was shocked. He could not stand it and screamed, calling the guy stupid. The character was interested in what he would tell, but revealed the truth, directly stating that he wanted to benefit. The leader began to shake. He became angry. His eyes narrowed, and in his face they expressed everything that they thought about him, that they immediately understood his deception. He began to swear, accusing Aiden of imagining himself to be someone, an administrator or a moderator. People behind the guy's back began to sweat. Throwing over his shoulder to his people to go and take everything from this village, there is a crowd there, and no one can cope with such a crowd. The crowd rushed. Their leader egged them on, gave permission, shouted, and had fun. Aiden and his friends stared at the crowd running towards them. The two looked at each other. If they use the ability, the hero will be exhausted. He turned his face black, gritted his teeth. The character will be protected by his operators. There is nothing to worry about. But Aiden himself put out his hand, summoning strength, and called for a team. The guy prepared in advance. He found out that these people were from the Hydra Guild. He figured out what he could do because the guild has many enemies. The players stared at their scoreboard. What they saw shocked them. Aiden created an event, a new one, in which there would be a big reward. But having done this, the guy's legs gave way. He bent over, exhaling. Looking at him in a half-bent state, grinning, the young man said that now the most interesting thing would happen. The players came forward to meet the guild, some with a spear, some with a sword. Blades clashed, player against guild member against each other. Aiden and his cameramen watched the players fight. The plan was good, so they had fewer problems. But seeing the leader, who was angry, his grin visible from afar, he pulled out his sword. Having given them confidence, they are still a Hydra Guild, and let them be taken by surprise. It was necessary to kill them. Ordinary players could not hold back the onslaught of the warriors. The leader screamed. His eyes were covered with a veil. He shouted that they were strong. Aiden was worried that the battle would drag on for a long time. Theodore decided to fit in if he was allowed. The young man knew that the guard could handle it, but he wanted to do it himself. He reached into the funnel with his hand, his vault. But he wanted to test the weapon that he had created himself, and he had a bow and arrow in his hands. The players will deal with their subordinates, and they will get rid of the commander. The leader gave the order. Suddenly, something hit the vice guild master in the shoulder, and the shoulder pad with the guild design scattered from the impact. The man grabbed his shoulder. There was an arrow sticking out there. He needed to hold the line. The leader looked at the arrow and could not believe it. He was ready for the blows, but there is no protection from the arrow of execution. Such arrows are used very rarely because the materials are expensive. Aiden held the arrow. Theo guided him on how to take it and in which direction to release it. Stretching out his finger, pointing at the guy, he gave the order to kill him first, as he opened an attack on them. The crowd rushed towards Aiden to get rid of him. Pulling out knives, they sped up. Taking aim, he used the accelerated shooting ability. The guy grinned. He wouldn't give in so easily. The arrows hit the target. Each arrow stuck into a person. Blood flowed. There was a lot of blood. It flew in different directions. The arrow flew beautifully, straight, without encountering any obstacle in its path, and hit exactly the target, the commander's target. He leaned back and began to fall over. Having fallen, he began to crumble. The warriors turned to look at him. Their commander fell. The players continued to run towards them, press them. They crowded the guild back. The guild people were confused. They whispered to each other, did not know what to do. There were fewer of them. Holding the defense would only result in losing people. Aiden and Theo watched as they began to retreat. They hoped that they would never return. Now the guy is sure that everyone will know, including the guilds, that it is not worth attacking the villagers. The players noticed that some other people were approaching them. They believed that not everyone had time to leave. The guy began to pull the sword out of its sheath. He didn't care, it didn't matter. Swinging his sword at the figure in the black hood, he thanked him for the buff and wanted to strike. The man under the hood grinned so that his teeth were visible. Aiden and Theodore turned towards the noise and looked at what was happening there. The hooded man held the hand of a man who was trembling and twisting his hand. The rest of the players ran towards him. They were ready to kill him. He was probably left over from the Hydra. But the players scattered in all directions. From the blow of unknown people, the blow shook the ground. People were surprised by his strength and thought that he was a high-level player. They were now trying to run away from him in horror, seeing how easily he threw the players to the sides. The hooded man flew at the remaining players. They started to run away, but it didn't work. He flew so fast, leaving a furrow on the ground, dust and stones flying to the sides. The hero looked at this, did not have time to block Theo. The battle unfolded before their eyes. Aiden watched the fleeing people out of the corner of his eye, and he also heard about human strength. The man looked at his hand. It trembled with strength. This is the kind of strength he wanted. He sought it. I was happy, smiled at this, learned from my comrade how he looked. He had a violet color. The eyes of the people who arrived glowed violet. They could handle anyone with such strength. Aiden received a notification. It was a warning. There was danger from new objects. The hero, without turning around, gave Theo an order. Power flowed in red, enveloping the heroes. These bastards have contacted the virus so they can harm the village. The guy put out his hand. Power flowed. They must solve this problem right now. A red light poured from above onto the village, taking it under a dome, protecting and preserving it. The two were surprised by the technical service. They were afraid that the administrator had come here after their hearts. Sarah assured that everything was fine. She fiddled with her scoreboard. Aiden waited. She moved all the residents, even the players, to a safe place, just as her hero taught her. Then Aiden decided to deal with them. He jumped and flew, spreading his palm, as if he wanted to scoop them up. Having turned a gray face, the man cursed through his teeth. He did not understand what was happening. They clashed in battle. They were not inferior to each other in strength. Debris flew, the earth shook. The guy laughed when they grabbed him by the throat. They described him that way. They found him. The viral man grabbed his hand. Aiden's hand was shaking. Another one flew towards him, saying that he should go with them. Aiden threw the second one away with a blow, very hard, so that he broke the wall with it. Theodore entered the battle. He will defend his master. Decisiveness and quickness in reaction. Does not allow the man Aiden to be distracted, forces him to look at himself. Aiden held his fist. He was glad that he hit him powerfully, but the hero did not show it. Standing in front of the man, he held his fist. Leaning towards him, he was in misunderstanding. Power flowed through Aiden's hands and was transferred to the man. He began to warm up and blush. He shouted to let him go, swore, but at the same time he swung at the guy. Aiden looked at him carefully, realized that he had gotten involved in something dangerous. His ability turned on editing. The young man hit him so hard that blood flowed from his mouth, and he bent over in pain. He was glad that he had raised his characteristics and level. His operators called out to him. Aiden looked at Theodore. Everything was fine with him too. When the guard approached, he smiled a mean smile. The guy smiled too and thanked him for his work. Theo was interested in what to do with the two and suggested removal as an option so that there would be no problems in the future. But the guy didn't want this. He would have been no different from the administrator. The hero decided to deal with him using his own method. He couldn't come up with a better one. Having penetrated the system, Aiden saw purple threads. He wondered where they got such power from. He took out his sword and decided to cut off their connection with the system, a punishment for them. The three watched him. They were delighted with this action. He stripped these two of the abilities that players have. They became ordinary people. Turning to Sarah and Jack, he told them that these guys were targeting him from the very beginning, and for now they would be locked somewhere until they woke up. And then they will interrogate them because there is a connection with the virus. Someone is pulling the strings. A voice rang out. Everyone looked at the speaker. They were surrounded by a purple veil. A purple funnel opened. It sucked in the guy. A voice demanded to go with him. Aiden was spun inside. Everyone rushed to him, trying to help, but they didn't have time. The guy screamed. Threads wrapped around him. He didn't understand where he was. He was in the space like their maintenance. The voice said it all. Aiden clenched his fist, trying to escape, clenched his teeth. His level weakened. The firewall couldn't cope. The virus was angry. It gave such power, but they could not cope with one person. A virus appeared. It towered over the hero. He did the right thing in deciding to watch them. Stretching out his hand, he tried to remove the screen. He wanted its strength. He was eager for it. Suddenly, a sword appeared and cut the evil virus in half. Aiden was surprised. He began to follow the weapon to see who it was. It was Procy. She was floating in the air, looking mercilessly and sadly. Panic covered Aiden's assistants. They screamed and did not know what to do. Theo warned not to get close to the virus. A voice was heard. He ordered to move away from this. Turning around to look, they were surprised. Severing the remains of the virus with his sword, lightning flashed, and those standing there recoiled. Sarah screamed. She wanted to know who it was, because they didn't understand what had happened. They were all surprised that she came here, because the village was under protection. Everyone watched as the girl walked silently into the open portal and disappeared there. The guys asked Sarah about getting to know each other, because Procy kept her gaze on her. But she remembered such magical power, she pressed her hands to her chest. The power was like that of Sirius. A little girl with wide eyes looked at someone nearby. The dragon looked at her with one glance. He heard the question about the family. There are 3 dragons in the world. They fulfill their duties conscientiously. The girl realizes. Her mouth opens slightly. She realized that this power belongs to another dragon. The hand is trying to break the bonds that hold the purple threads and escape from the trap. The guy will look for a way out of here. He was distracted. That's why he's still alive. He saw a silhouette in the portal, wondered who appeared unexpectedly and helped him. The girl reprimanded Regina. It was impudent of him to behave like that. She was angry that while the administrator was busy eliminating viruses, he was acting openly. Procy took out her weapon. She will remove the virus since that's what he wants. Regan found it funny. Funny that they wanted to remove him. No matter how wrong it was, no one would dare. Procy rushed into battle. Sword pointed forward. With quick steps, she approached the goal. The virus cursed. It suffered from an unexpected attack, so now there is little it can do. Stealth was one of Regan's abilities. He hid from the girl. He released a glowing ball from his hand. He will watch the girl become infected slowly. The virus directed its power at the unsuspecting Procy. She was looking at him in the other direction and attacked from behind. She twisted her sword sharply and parried the attack, her sword gleaming, ready for another attack. Regan looked and did not believe in what was happening. It was impossible. The explosion of the ball was beautiful. That's how its infection disintegrated. She looked very carefully, and the virus kept wondering how she could see his attack. But such a stupid ability could not deceive her eyes, the eye of the dragon, which helps to see true nature. Procy's retaliatory blow swept him away, blinding him with a bright blue color, and covered himself with his hand. Regan flew off, began to crumble from the impact. His arms and body all began to crumble. The girl hit him with a spear, finishing him off completely. The blow was beautiful and reached its goal. Standing with his foot on Regan, looking up at him, holding his spear in his hand. Raising her head and lowering her eyes, she allowed him to say his last words. The virus lay there and looked at her, smiled. It was falling apart. It wanted everything to be over. The sword is raised. He is already on his last breath. His end is already near. He exhales that the end of Procy will also be soon. The sword reached its target. Into Regan's smiling face, he was satisfied with his end. Aiden stood and watched. He admired the girl. She defeated the virus so quickly. Continuing to look at Procy, the young man also felt a familiar energy and remembered Sirius. Suddenly, the girl's sword shot up, and now its tip was touching the guy's face. Procy knew who he was, a non-player character who had accidentally gained administrator power. She looked at him with her yellow eyes and decided that he would go with her. The administrator should see him. A purple portal opened, and someone entered the virus space through it. Someone approached Regan and wondered how such a legendary man ended up in such a position. It was the worm, he grinned, knew that this would happen. Then he found something to do and ended up here. He came up and stood watching, warning me not to act headlong. But Regan's removal was funny to watch so accurately. The worm's smile became much wider. Someone else began to approach him, walking slowly towards the two of them. A man with long black hair, yellow eyes, he was sad. This is Belg. The worm joked he would not let Regina die, turning to the approaching one. Stretching out his hand, using his strength, smiling, he thought that this guy played a huge role in espionage. Regan was recovering. His dark figure appeared, grabbed his chest and coughed. Cursing at him, he was lucky that the worm was here now and he was helping him. Regan was not delighted. He had no desire to be indebted to this man. Three shadows talked among themselves. They were worried that they would have little strength if someone was not on their side. Belg promised to release the administrator, his calm, chiseled face devoid of all emotions. The village's defenses fell. The maintenance completed its work. Three people stood and looked at the opening scene. Aiden and Portsy appeared in front of them. She pointed the weapon in his direction. Sarah and Jack opened their mouths. They were afraid for the guy. They looked and did not move. Pointing the sword at him, the girl thought, he is a human, and his level is higher than Asper's, as he survived the removal. She used the eye of the dragon to test the possibility of becoming a virus. Portsy saw with her vision the red aura of the young man. She was confused by the fact that it was familiar to her. She looked at the aura. It was a little different, but the same as Asper's, she wondered. Maybe it's because he's a bug. Aiden saw glowing eyes, and on the sides, another dragon's eyes penetrating into the very depths. Realization overwhelmed the guy. He realized that he had already seen such an ability, and he had seen it in Sirius. Aiden didn't want Portsy to penetrate as deep as she wanted. His eyes glowed red. The girl closed her eyes. She did not expect a response, and she did not understand. Darkening his face, the power is blocked. This has never happened before. Portsy grabbed the weapon tighter. She wanted to deliver this man to Asper as quickly as possible. Theodore bent over and screamed loudly. His cry reached the master. He was very worried about him. He jumped up to Aiden, covered him with his back, ordered him to stay behind him, and stared at the girl. The guy looked at him. He was excited. He was holding her back, but he didn't know how much longer he could. Portsy was also surprised by the behavior of the guard. He continued to shout and tell the guy to run away to a safe place. She was outraged that having only recently gained strength, he already had a person like Theo under his command. Even Asper does not have such strong defense. He has high-ranking fighters, but this is not the same. Aiden didn't know the girl standing well, as he decided that she had a fairly close relationship with the administrator. He showed curiosity about his attitude towards the moderator, remembering all the pain that this person caused him. Anger overtook the guy, completely taking possession of him. He shouted out to the girl what the admin needed and even swore. Looking at him with a hard look, she could not tell him here and would not allow him to insult Asper. Pulling out his hammer, he couldn't respect the one who removed his innocent sister and him. Turning black, Aiden prepared to attack, his fiery sword already in his hands. The guy asked to tell the admin that no one dares to poke him, and Theo was also nearby, ready to defend. One with a sword, the other with threatening bombs. They are waiting for Asper if he wants to talk. Let them come. Portsy put out her hand. There was no other choice and began to control her swords. The look is heavy. He looks straight. Apparently, he will have to drag the guy by force. And they started attacking each other. Bombs flew, knives flew, explosions began. Suddenly, Mia rushed in and stood in the middle of the battle, thereby stopping them. With the last of her strength, she stood holding her hand. Her head was bowed, covered in abrasions and scratches. Portsy became worried about the girl. She approached her and found out where these wounds came from. The girl begged, turning to Portsy to give her a minute of her time. Again, a large hall, columns, a table, and people around the table. They were resolving issues and matters. Everyone gathered around one chair, the chair on which Ari was sitting. Asper was also sitting on a chair, opposite the girl, with soldiers standing behind him. He looked at Ari. He was sorry that the girl's return was happening like this. The girl looked at him simply, without any anger, but her hands on the table were pulled into a magical trap, so she couldn't get out. It was a necessary measure. The administrator was starting to get angry. She was using a power that cannot be used, turning the whole world into nothing. In Asper's memories, Ari falls and begins to disappear. He couldn't lose her. The girl clenched her teeth when she heard the request to return to her duties and leave control of the system to him. Ari clenched her fists. The trap crackled. She was no longer the operator of this place. The girl unclenched her hands. The trap burst and she became free. She was already Aiden's operator. At that very moment, those around her raised their swords against her, and the steel began to glow. Luke also put out his sword, but he was thinking about what kind of strength she had if she broke the administrator's shackles. Acer stopped his warriors with one hand. He wanted to know how she knew Aiden. She looked at the administrator as he scolded her, saying that she was crazy for trusting that person. A bug that can turn into a virus changes quickly, which is very bad. He will make a decision when Procy brings him here, then there will be a conclusion about what influence he has on the system. She laughed loudly and openly. Good news, she was tired of hiding. With her hands folded under her chin, she said that the time had come. The guy had been hiding for so long. Looking up at him, not holding back an open smile, she will remove him from the position of administrator. Procy reassured Mia, she did a great job, now it will be her business, and the girl had better rest. Aiden watched the girls whisper and didn't like it. When he found out that Ari was taken by the administrator, he was shocked. But Procy couldn't help but take the guy with her. Even if Mia asks for it, she closed her eyes for a minute. The girl tried to be indignant, but the admin assistant interrupted her. She would do as he said. What the girl with the ears told her made her eyes widen. He can fix the bug. Looking at Aiden, she did not believe, although she had heard Mia that he was very important. Having used her ability, she saw that the girl was not lying. She saw the whole process with her own eyes. Gritting his teeth, the guy remembered Ari. But Procy was deep in thought about what Asper wanted if the bug could be fixed. Realization appeared in the girl's eyes. If he has such an ability, then restoration is possible, she imagined Asper and both sides of his face. The girls looked sideways at the guy. He can return the original appearance of the administrator. Mia extended her hand to Aiden, and in her open palm lay Ari's gifted amulet. He looked at the amulet. He knew that he created it for her. The girl said that Ari told her to come here. She conveyed a message that she would be a little longer, although she promised to appear earlier. He clenched her thing tightly in his fist and realized that he needed to trust her. I distracted Procy from the conversation. She wanted to finish it all quickly. She must take him with her. Their problem is not solved. He must understand this. Procy could let him go, but this won't happen. Someone else will come for him anyway. Aiden agreed to do this, but for a reason, he will also ask for something in exchange for his consent. Blackening his face, he immediately warned that politeness and patience with the administrator would not take place. Portsy accepted all this. She opened the blue portal. There is no need to linger any longer. His operators and guards ran towards Aiden. They shouted that it was dangerous to go there alone, and it was worth taking them all with you. The guy stopped the guard's pores, put his hand on his shoulder. We'll leave him here. Please protect the residents. You can only trust Theo. He understood this and will protect his people no matter what. Aiden smiled a big smile as he walked away into the portal. Everything will be fine, he's sure of it. The viruses smiled with their terrible toothy smiles. There were many of them. A whole crowd. They moved on their territory. Plenty of rocks, a huge number of spears. 3 major viruses observed this pattern: Worm, Regan, and Belg. They can't do anything without the Trojan. The administrator will simply delete them. Regan gets angry. But having taken out a weapon made of gold, and as soon as he saw it, he immediately became softer, and they had a chance to win. The worm smiled. All preparations were completed. In his hands was a sword that Troyan himself owned. The time has come for Asper to fall. We just need to wait a little. Arriving at the place, Aiden realized where the administrator had been all this time. Procy turned to Asper. She brought him. The guy spun around, turning around. He stood on the dais, one eye sparkling. He praised the girl for her excellent job. Luke lamented that he couldn't solve the problem himself, and now Asper had to intervene. Looking at Aiden, his aura changed, and he himself gained more strength. The guy started the conversation first. He was interested in why he called him here. Their meeting did not go as those around it imagined. Asper was interested in Troyan, but Aiden knew nothing about him. The Trojan is capable of destroying this world. She came from another world, and she has great power. She also subjugates viruses and controls them. The administrator wants to keep him safe because she is interested in him. Asper delved into the memories. It seemed strange to him that he deleted it, but it survived. Pictures flashed before his eyes. He could not believe that all this was Trojan. Asper remembered this day of inspection. He came himself. The place was completely contaminated. The Trojan is not just a virus. It can change its appearance, and no one will guess that it is a virus. Therefore, he could not leave everything as it was. He had to take measures. The more the admin spoke, the more gloomy the hero became. He clenched his fist harder. He shook. He had to find another way out and not remove them. Aiden didn't like the answer. There was no other way out. The guy's eyes narrowed. He started shouting in Asper's back. that this was all nonsense. There was a way out. It was impossible to remove him and his sister. He had full power, his role. Two people grew up in front of the guy, Duke and Luke. They were afraid to let him near the admin, as he could pose a threat. Aiden's eye twitched. They could destroy him if they got close. But he besieged them. They were just talking. There was no need to interfere, especially since they themselves invited him. The young man got angry. He is already a non-player character. No one dares to command him. Luke clenched his teeth. He was leaning down. He felt the same force as the administrator, the same pressing force. There was a voice that warned that Aiden should not be touched. Otherwise, there would be enemies. He recognized this voice. Looking in the direction where the voice was heard, he saw a silhouette sitting with its legs dangling down. Easy, Zen and Luke stared at her in shock. They thought she was locked and couldn't get out. Having jumped off, Ari stood next to the guy. He was immediately worried about her condition, but she began to apologize to him. He looked at her and could not take his eyes off her. She apologized from her older brother. She started fiddling with her fingers, not knowing how to say that Asper was her brother. The admin interrupted her explanations. He wanted to bring them back to the conversation. They moved away from the topic. Asper began to list what the young man had done for the village. About creating content, he knew all this from the reports. Having asked his main question, what was Aiden's goal, he began to tensely wait for an answer. The guy wanted, his goal was to destroy the current system. The admin turned pale. Everyone was stunned by the young man's answer. They opened their mouths and thought it was nonsense, even in front of the administrator. A question asked by Aiden made Asper grow gloomy and silent. There is no update. Viruses are their own masters. He is different from him. He will fight. It is better to destroy the system than to let everything take its course. Aiden can fix bugs. That's his main advantage, so he's right. The operators began to whisper among themselves. This is impossible. But Ari interrupted and said that she witnessed this. Procy must confirm. Everyone stared at her. She lowered her eyes down. Asper suggested we talk privately for a little while, to step away and talk. He squinted his eyes and heard that no one could do anything without the admin's permission. Lowering his eyes, Asper agreed that the guy was right. He is an administrator and knows about this, about what is going on. So he looked at the young man and realized that the choice could have been different, that it was necessary not to delete the characters. Emotions were taboo, but after losing Sirius, he began to feel pain. Standing in front of each other, almost alike, fire and ice, Asper admitted that he had failed. With his head down and his eyes on the floor, he decided to resign from the position of administrator. The barrier disappeared. Everyone looked at them. Curiosity took over them. The conversation was interesting. They saw that the guy pressed his fiery sword towards Asper, as if he wanted to cut him off. If you want to escape, it won't work out, thought the young man. He was blacker than a cloud, immersed in his thoughts. Horror in Portsy's eyes. Ari clenched her teeth. Giving up the rights of an administrator does not relieve him of responsibility for everything. The girl with blue hair closed her eyes. It was right to think so. She knew about it. Hearing the admin's words about removal, Portsy screamed and moved towards them. Aiden pulled the guy's collar towards himself, clenched his fists. He wanted him to suffer like he did. His loyal subjects ran towards him, cursing with swords. His assistants were on his side. Stopping abruptly, they saw the removal command and stared at it in horror. Aiden's burning gaze was directed at the guys. He ordered them not to move, but they could not move. The command was the same as that of the admin. Aiden could remove this place if he wanted. He is not as weak as he seems. They all need to stay in place. Procy ran towards them. He screamed. She begged not to delete. She begged to leave Asper. Asper had no choice. The whole burden of responsibility, the burden of making a decision was on him, so he changed. Procy stopped, put her hand to her chest and asked to remove it, but not him. Having darkened, the guy did not change his decision, because no words would help the admin or justify him. The young man squeezed Asper with a trembling hand. He demanded that his sister be returned, then only he would help. But there was one person who could make him change his mind, Ari. He looked at her. Two parallels. Because she is also a sister, she also loves her brother. The choice is difficult. No one knows what was happening inside Aiden, but he was bent over. Tears appeared, teeth clenched, eyes downcast. The administrator fell to his knees. Everyone ran up to him. They tried to understand how he was. They were worried. Ari slowly approached Aiden. She didn't know what to say. She felt awkward, but the guy stood with his head down. But the guy said nothing. He just silently left, not looking at anyone. Everyone looked after him. The operators surrounded Asper. They reprimanded him for his behavior, if only everything had gone wrong. Zen began to guess that the emotions had returned to the admin. He also did not understand what had happened. The administrator is at the center of everything. He cannot fill this role anymore. The new administrator is much better. Ari did not choose him lightly. It was her best choice. But the operators started talking, interrupting each other. They didn't believe it, because thanks to him and only him, this whole world still holds together. If there is no one, someone must take this position, because the enemies do not sleep. It was painful for the guy to remove each of them. He remembered how he touched them all and they fell apart. They all knew about it. New viruses led by the worm were approaching. They were already close. His people supported him, reassured him, and said that he had not failed, but quite the contrary. Procy decided to fix everything. She offered to help Aiden. Turning around, they saw him leaving. Turning around, the guy heard what the girl said and became interested. He asked if he had heard exactly, cure Asper after all, if he was not mistaken. Turning to the admin, he asked how he could help, even if it wasn't a bug. His unique opportunity, like no one else had, will help Asper. He will help him become a great administrator. Aiden agreed. Procy put her hand to her chest in gratitude. Asper closed his eyes. The young man did not rush, stretching out his hand. He began immediately, but warned that he was not responsible for this. Ari reassured. She completely trusted Aiden, believes and trusts. Lowering his eyes, Asper decided to trust the girl. Her decisions were always correct. Moving away from the operators, the guys stood together. They were engulfed in red. Aiden flew down the system. Everything was already familiar. He went down to the administrator. Seeing a bright blue glow, this had never happened before. He was surprised by it. Seeing the lines in his chest is a difficult case, but he will try to cope. But when he saw a glow on his hand, it came from the bracelet on his hand, Alice's bracelet. It glowed so that a portal was formed. Everything burned with a yellow light. Suddenly, a yellow figure of a girl appeared behind him. The guy realized that it was his sister. He saw this and was finally convinced. He raised his hand to his mouth. The girl grabbed Asper's head. There were strange movements from her. She smiled. At this time, sadly looking down at her feet, Selly walked forward. A little girl with wings saw the devastation, how the buildings collapsed, looked at the rubble. She saw how magical creatures were destroying her home, and the moderator was hovering above. Hearing something, she turned her head to the side. There was someone behind her. Turning around, she saw grinning faces that were looking straight at her. He pulled out the sword and stuck it into the strange figure, to which he didn't even flinch. It was a virus, having taken off its clothes and presented it completely in front of the girl in its true form. The girl had already entered where there was a dome protecting the administrator's habitat. Her sword was always with her. Pulling it out from under her clothes, she decided to take a desperate step. Raising her sword, she approached a sparkling cube that shone blue. Still, breaking the cube with the sword, it shattered into small pieces. This is serious. She took this risk for a reason. Her figure lit up with purple color. Everything around was filled with this color. Figures emerged from the portal, moving smoothly and leisurely. At this time, two figures of the guys lit up red. Ari stood and watched. She completely trusted Aiden. Everyone was alarmed. They didn't know what was happening, but everyone stood and watched intently. Unexpectedly, the sky lit up red for them, and frightened, they began to look for the cause. Luke and Duke looked around. Confusion overshadowed them, and they looked with their mouths open. Buildings that had previously glowed a pure blue now began to become infected, beginning to turn purple. They gathered in a circle and began to find out what it was. Seely was responsible for protection, but no one knew how this happened. The virus was watching them from above. They chose the right time to attack. The administrator is now weak. Asper sat with his eyes closed. He was feeling better, which made him happy. His eye was clearing up. The viruses were released. They passed through the portal, broke through the defenses. There were many of them. The worm sarcastically grinned with his smile. Snapping his finger, he had a plan. Many viruses rushed with grinning mouths, teeth sticking out like shadows. They were scary. A crowd of monsters rushed, crawling out of all the cracks. From all the portals, they rushed at the people. Gritting their teeth, the operators saw these viruses. They will fight, but they will need a lot of strength. They all pulled out their weapons. The confidence in their eyes was complete. They will not give up. Portsy looked at the arrivals and recognized one of them. Her eyes narrowed and glowed yellow. Turning to Ari, she asked for a favor to ensure Asper's safety. She looked at Aiden. Everything was fine. But for some reason, she felt anxiety that she did not understand. Aiden, although outwardly calm, had tears flowing in his system. He looked at his sister and did not believe. He blew himself up, rushed towards her, extended his hand, screamed, and was in a hurry not to lose sight of her. But Asper put his hand forward, stopping the guy. He shouted that this was not his sister. He immediately realized that here she was. She had been hiding for a long time. There was no sister at all. This was all a cunning move. This was all planned. It wasn't a girl, Aiden screamed. He couldn't believe it was all a lie. The child's hand grabbed the administrator's hand and squeezed it tightly, which was not typical for a girl in terms of strength. She stretched out her hand to the middle, to her strength she shared. Now she wanted to take back hers. She lit up with a bright yellow light, rose up and began to hover over the young men. A girl with white hair and an arrogant look appeared before them, in a different image, in the true one. There was a battle going on the other side, where all the operators rallied together against one common enemy. Luke and Easy cut with their swords the invasion of the virus that crawled and clung to them. The virus is large, powerful, and formidable, approaching the operators to attack. Duke fired arrows one after another with a quick movement, without getting lost, and went on the attack. The target of the virus was the administrator. They saw two figures in red fire. We couldn't get through to the guys, we were up against the defense. The dome was so reinforced that we couldn't get through. Procy placed this, holding her arms out, holding guard using her strength. The red monsters came out to the call of the mistress. With the command of her hands, she ordered to protect. The viruses looked. When they saw the red creatures, they felt fear. Regan got scared and began to tell the worm. Procy screamed when she saw that something was wrong with the guys. Ari rushed to them too. Asper screamed. It was clear that he was in pain. Ari jumped up to him, looking at him worriedly. She looked with open eyes, trying to find some reason. She decided that he was getting better. But when she looked at Aiden, she realized that he was feeling bad. He was shaking all over. She was distracted by a yellow light that was from above, appearing like a ball, blurring more and more. Seeing from the heights the viruses who emerged from this world, they screamed in surprise and were pleasantly shocked. It was Troy, majestic and beautiful, towering above them. Darkness was coming to the cities. Darkness in the form of viruses. Defenses fell as administrators no longer had authority. Everyone was surprised. The players looked at their scoreboards, and all their screens glowed red. By killing magical creatures, unsuspecting players also became suspicious. The problem began with the man's fall. His friend watched and waited for him to get up. But this did not happen. He was shocked, because players do not die. They had not died until that moment.